What remains of a dynasty when its grand estates fall silent, when wealth fades into memory, and when lives shaped by ambition leave behind unanswered shadows in history's quiet corners? Welcome to Historic Docs Archive. It is a pleasure to have you here. Please share where and when you are listening, and consider subscribing as we begin our journey together. In the early years of the 20th century, the city of Smyrna stood at a crossroads of civilizations, a place where the cultures of Europe and Asia flowed into one another along bustling quays and narrow market streets. It was a city shaped by centuries of trade, migration, and coexistence, a city whose layered identity formed the backdrop for many lives that would later be carried far from its shores. Among the people who lived there was a young boy named Aristotle Onassis, born into a prosperous Greek family whose livelihood and traditions were deeply tied to the rhythm of this cosmopolitan port. Smyrna at the time was not simply a geographical location, it was a Mediterranean world in miniature, filled with Orthodox churches, Ottoman mosques, Armenian workshops, Levantine mansions, and the constant sounds of ships arriving from distant continents. For a child, it was a place of overwhelming vitality, where the scent of spices, tobacco leaves, and salt water mixed with the perpetual murmur of commerce. Yet beneath the surface, tensions that had been building for generations were beginning to strain the fragile balance that defined the city. As the Ottoman Empire weakened, national identities hardened, and the multicultural reality of Smyrna grew increasingly fragile. Aristotle's early years were shaped by a sense of security that came from belonging to a respected family of merchants. His father, Socrates Onassis, provided a stable upbringing and carried forward the confidence of a man who believed deeply in the future of his city and his trade. Yet history was moving quickly, and the world around them was changing in ways that few fully understood. Foreign armies marched, treaties shifted, and the dream of a peaceful, shared Smyrna was slowly breaking apart. The young Aristotle could not have known it then, but the stability of his early childhood would soon turn into one of the major catastrophes of the modern era, a turning point that would shape the rest of his life and the destiny of his entire family. As the First World War ended and the geopolitical landscape of the Eastern Mediterranean was redrawn, Greek administration of Smyrna in 1919 opened a chapter of hope for some and fear for others. Communities that had lived side by side for generations saw old suspicions re-emerge, and political promises created expectations that reality could not sustain. In September 1922, when Aristotle was still in his teens, the Great Fire of Smyrna erupted, a tragedy that has remained etched into the memory of every family touched by its destruction. For 4 days, flames consumed entire districts, turning homes, shops, archives, and centuries of history into smoke that darkened the skies above the bay. Tens of thousands fled to the waterfront in desperate attempts to escape the inferno, while foreign ships watched from the harbor, unable or unwilling to intervene. The Onassis family, like countless others, found themselves stripped of the world they once knew. Their prosperity, their home, their routines, and the sense of security built over generations were suddenly gone. The experience of displacement reshaped the course of Aristotle's life more profoundly than any other single event. The boy who had grown up surrounded by the comforts of a thriving city became a refugee almost overnight, forced into a reality defined by loss, uncertainty, and the need to rebuild from nothing. As the fires subsided and the burnt shell of Smyrna cooled, families scattered across the region, many making their way to Greece, which was itself struggling to absorb the influx of refugees. The Onassis family, once financially secure, arrived in a homeland that was unfamiliar and burdened by its own troubles. Housing was scarce, employment was uncertain, and the sense of dislocation was overwhelming. For someone of Aristotle's age, the collapse of his world created a lasting imprint. one that would influence his ambitions, his decisions, and his relationship to security and success. Many refugee families found themselves crowded into temporary shelters or living with relatives in towns unprepared for such numbers. The emotional burden of displacement was heavy, not only for those who had lost their possessions, but also for those who had lost their sense of belonging. The Onassis family attempted to re-establish themselves, but the circumstances were difficult, and the young Aristotle began to realize that the future he had once imagined would no longer be possible within the familiar boundaries of Greece. It was during these uncertain months that he first began to consider the possibility of leaving the region entirely. Stories circulated among refugees about opportunities abroad, especially in South America, where communities of Greek immigrants were beginning to grow. Buenos Aires, in particular, was spoken of as a city of promise, where industrious newcomers could build a new life if they were willing to endure hardship at the beginning. For a young man who had just lost everything, the idea of starting over in a distant land carried both fear and hope. Yet Aristotle possessed a determination that had been sharpened by the trials he had endured. He observed the struggles around him, watched his father work to rebuild the family's prospects, and understood that survival required not only resilience, but also boldness. The world he had known was gone, and he felt a growing pull toward places where the future seemed open, even if the path forward was uncertain. When he finally made the decision to leave for Argentina, it marked the first major step in a journey that would eventually transform him into one of the most influential shipping magnates of the 20th century. But at the time, it was simply the decision of a young refugee seeking a way to rebuild his life. In 1923, Aristotle boarded a ship bound for Buenos Aires, carrying with him little more than determination and the memories of a world consumed by fire. The voyage itself was long and filled with mixed emotions. The deck of the ship provided moments of quiet reflection, where he could look out across the sea and contemplate the extraordinary changes that had taken place in such a short period of time. Many others on the vessel shared similar stories of loss and hope, creating an atmosphere of collective uncertainty, yet also collective courage. As the ship cut through the waters of the Atlantic, Aristotle was aware that he was leaving behind not only the ruins of Smyrna, but also the last remnants of his childhood. When the vessel finally reached Buenos Aires, the city appeared enormous, unfamiliar and alive with sound. The docks were crowded with people speaking languages from across the world, and the pace of daily life moved with an energy that contrasted sharply with the somber mood he had known in the refugee settlements of Greece. The architecture, the traffic, the trams, and the constant movement of goods through the port revealed a city undergoing rapid transformation. For someone who had grown up in a bustling trading center like Smyrna, the commercial vitality of Buenos Aires felt both overwhelming and strangely reassuring. It was a place where fortunes were being built, where immigrants could carve out new identities, and where hard work often led to opportunity. Aristotle secured his first job as a telephone operator, a position that would later prove far more influential than he could have predicted. Day after day, he sat in a quiet room connecting calls, listening to the voices of businessmen, brokers, traders, and shipping agents. Through these conversations, he gained insight into the mechanics of commerce, the rhythms of negotiation, and the patterns that governed international trade. He learned when markets rose and fell, how deals were made, and how fortunes shifted with each decision. The work required patience, precision, and attention to detail, but it also provided an informal education in global economics. In those early mornings and late evenings, as he adjusted cords and monitored the steady clicking of lines, he began to form ideas about how he might one day participate in the same world of opportunity he observed from a distance. The experience became a foundation for the career that would follow, shaping his understanding of how wealth was created, leveraged, and expanded across borders. The telephone room was dim, lit by a few lamps that cast long shadows across the equipment. The quiet clicking of connections filled the air, creating a steady rhythm that marked the passage of time. On many nights, Aristotle worked alone, listening to the sounds of the city beyond the walls, a reminder that life continued to move forward even as he planned his uncertain future. The world had taken much from him, but in these modest surroundings, he found the beginnings of a new direction. As each call connected and disconnected, the soft clicking of the telephone lines became a constant companion, a quiet signal that he was moving slowly, steadily, into the next chapter of his life. The gentle repetition of that sound would become the final note of these early years, a reminder of how new beginnings often emerge from the smallest moments. The gentle clicking of the telephone lines lingers for a moment more, as though echoing in the quiet room long after the last connection has been made. That faint mechanical rhythm, steady and predictable, becomes a bridge into the silence that followed each workday in the young life of Aristotle Onassis. When he stepped away from the switchboard, he often walked through the dim streets of Buenos Aires with a mixture of fatigue and determination, reflecting on the path that had led him so far from the world he once knew. The smoke of the Smyrna fire had faded into memory, yet the sense of loss it created remained, shaping every thought and ambition. In the early 1920s, the city around him pulsed with restless energy, filled with tens of thousands of immigrants who were also trying to rebuild their lives. The docks, the warehouses, the markets, and the crowded boarding houses formed a landscape where hope mixed with hardship. It was in this environment that Aristotle slowly began to understand that the journey toward a new life would be long and demanding, shaped not only by ambition, but by persistence in the face of uncertainty. Buenos Aires at that time was a city of contrasts. Wealthy districts boasted grand avenues and European facades, while the working-class neighborhoods were packed with families from Italy, Greece, Syria, Spain, and Eastern Europe. The soundscape changed from block to block. The voices of dock workers shouting in Spanish mingled with snippets of Greek, Italian, and Yiddish. Street musicians played tangos near cafes crowded with newcomers, and the constant movement of trams added a rhythmic pulse to the daily drama of the city. For Aristotle, the bustle of the port felt familiar, a reminder of the maritime world he had known in Smyrna, yet everything else felt overwhelmingly new. He arrived with little money, carrying a refugee's uncertainty, but he also carried something more valuable, an instinctive understanding that opportunities often emerge in places where goods, cultures, and people intersect. The early months in Argentina were difficult. The Onassis family, now scattered and trying to rebuild in different ways, could not offer much support. Aristotle lived modestly, stretching every coin, sharing cramped rooms with other young immigrants, and sending portions of his limited earnings back home whenever he could. Yet in these conditions, he found a sense of independence that had not been possible when his family's business had once provided comfort and stability. Each day at the telephone exchange exposed him to the conversations of businessmen who operated far above his current station. He listened to shipping schedules, contract negotiations, currency discussions, and the subtle tones of confidence and caution that seasoned traders used when they navigated uncertain markets. What he absorbed through these conversations was not simply information, but the structure of opportunity itself. He learned to recognize patterns in the voices he heard, moments when fear signaled a coming shift or when excitement hinted at promising ventures. As the months passed, Aristotle found himself increasingly fascinated by the flow of goods that passed through the port. Tobacco shipments, in particular, drew his attention. He knew the scent of tobacco well from his childhood, when warehouses in Smyrna stored bales of leaves destined for markets across Europe. Now, in Buenos Aires, he saw the same product from another angle. Crates arriving from rural provinces, merchants negotiating prices, and workers transporting bundles through the humid air of the dockside markets. He visited these areas during breaks or after long shifts, lingering to observe how deals were made and how the marketplace responded to fluctuations in supply. It was in these crowded stalls, surrounded by the sharp scent of tobacco and the hurried voices of traders, that he began to imagine a way to return to the world of commerce that had once shaped his family's identity. One afternoon, after listening to yet another sequence of calls linking buyers and sellers across continents, Aristotle resolved to take the first step toward entering the tobacco trade himself. He began modestly, buying small quantities of leaves and reselling them to local merchants. It required long hours and careful attention to detail, but he found the work invigorating. Each successful transaction restored a fragment of the confidence he had lost during the upheaval of his youth. He learned which blends were preferred, which growers were reliable, and how prices shifted with the seasons. His efforts did not immediately yield great profits, but they offered something more important, a sense of direction. He was no longer merely a refugee or a switchboard operator. He was becoming a participant in the vast commercial networks that shaped the world economy. Despite occasional setbacks, Aristotle continued to build his knowledge. He spent evenings studying the habits of experienced traders, watching how they assessed risk and how they responded to news from abroad. Buenos Aires newspapers brought updates from Europe, the Middle East, and North America, and he read them carefully, comparing the information with what he heard through the telephone lines. This combination of observation and intuition allowed him to anticipate changes that others overlooked. Yet the progress was slow, and he understood that tobacco alone would not be enough to lift him into the world of true opportunity. Ships, he noticed, transported far more than tobacco, and their movements dictated the pace of global trade. If he could understand shipping, he might understand everything. As this realization took root, Aristotle began spending more time near the docks. He watched the vessels that arrived and departed, noting how different companies managed their schedules and how cargo was loaded and unloaded. He studied the crews, the agents, and the brokers who negotiated freight rates. The ships themselves fascinated him, their size, their purpose, and their role as essential links between distant economies. He saw vessels that carried textiles, grains, metals, and fuel, each one a floating chapter in the story of world commerce. Gradually, he recognized that shipping was not merely an industry, but a network of endless possibility. Where others saw only the routine movement of goods, he saw potential paths toward the kind of influence he had long dreamed of reclaiming. One day, as he stood watching a small freighter pull away from the quay, he realized that the distance between himself and the world of shipping was not as vast as it once seemed. Many of the ships entering Buenos Aires were old, worn, and inexpensive compared to the grand vessels that dominated the Atlantic routes. During economic downturns, owners sometimes sold them at remarkably low prices. Aristotle began to consider how he might one day acquire a vessel of his own, even a modest one, as a first step. It was an ambitious idea for a young man with limited resources, but ambition was something he had never lacked. He carried with him the memory of a prosperous childhood, destroyed by forces beyond his control, and he vowed to build a life that no fire could take from him again. Yet in those early years, this dream remained distant. His life continued to revolve around long workdays, careful savings, and steady observation. The scent of tobacco still followed him through many of his daily routines, lingering on his clothes and settling into the small rooms where he lived. It was in those rooms, under the dim glow of a lamp, that he often allowed himself to imagine the future. The tobacco trade had opened his eyes to the possibilities of commerce, but it was the movement of ships that captured his imagination most deeply. As he reflected each night, the smell of tobacco always remained, drifting softly through the air, reminding him of where he had begun and hinting at the greater ventures that lay ahead. And it is with that faint scent, rising from the crowded warehouses of the port, that this chapter reaches its quiet conclusion. The faint scent of tobacco drifts upward through the warm air of the Buenos Aires docks, lingering in the stillness that follows the day's final transactions. It is a scent that settles on clothing, on wooden crates, and on the narrow streets that wind through the marketplace. For the young Aristotle Onassis, it also settles into memory, becoming a constant reminder of the world he has entered and the path he hopes to follow. The fragrance clings to him as he walks away from the warehouses each evening, carrying with it the quiet realization that his early steps into commerce have begun to shape a new direction for his life. The tobacco markets have offered him education, connections, and the beginnings of confidence, yet they have also shown him the limits of small trades in a world ruled by giants. As he moves through the dim streets, the scent slowly begins to blend with the broader smells of the port until it becomes part of a larger rhythm, one defined not just by the goods themselves, but by how they travel. It is through this gradual merging that Aristotle begins to see beyond the product he handles. Tobacco, he realizes, is only one of many items arriving daily from distant fields and provinces. What matters even more is the means by which the leaves reach the city's docks, the vessels that carry them, and the networks of transport that connect nations. The longer he observes the activity around the port, the more he understands that the future he imagines does not rest on the leaves he buys and sells, but on the ships that bring them. Over time, the fragrance of tobacco shifts from being the central focus of his days to being a stepping stone towards something larger, almost as if the scent itself is guiding him from the ground-level world of stalls and warehouses to the wider horizon of maritime commerce. He often stands on the edge of the quay, watching as vessels of all shapes and sizes move across the water. The port of Buenos Aires is alive with motion, barges carrying grain, freighters loaded with manufactured goods, and passenger ships carrying hopeful immigrants much like himself. Every morning, the sound of foghorns signals the arrival of new cargo, and every evening, the silhouettes of ships fade slowly into the fading light as they make their way toward the open sea. Aristotle studies their movements, noting which companies control the busiest routes and which vessels appear past their prime. He observes how agents negotiate fees, how crews load and unload goods, and how delays ripple through the city when a single ship runs behind schedule. Bit by bit, he begins to grasp not only the mechanics of the port, but also the larger patterns that govern global trade. In his spare time, he visits cafes near the harbor where maritime workers gather. These places, filled with sailors, brokers, and laborers, provide a quiet space for listening and learning. Men speak openly about storms encountered on distant voyages, about captains who know how to navigate difficult waters, and about owners who cut costs to stay afloat in competitive markets. Aristotle rarely speaks during these gatherings, choosing instead to absorb the information as if it were another language he must learn to navigate the future. The conversations reveal that the shipping world is both vast and fragile, influenced by politics, currency values, weather patterns, and international agreements. It is a world of complexity and risk, but also one of immense opportunity for those who understand how to read its currents. By the time he turns 20, Aristotle has built enough familiarity with the port to sense subtle shifts that others overlook. He notices when shipbuilders in Europe struggle, when scrap steel prices change, and when owners quietly seek to sell aging vessels. The Great Depression is beginning to reshape global markets, creating instability that affects companies across the world. To many, this instability is cause for alarm, but Aristotle sees something different. He remembers what it meant to lose everything in Smyrna, to rebuild from nothing, and to survive by recognizing opportunity where others see only uncertainty. The lessons from his past help him understand that moments of global disruption often provide openings for those willing to take bold steps. Still, he remains a young man with limited savings, working long hours to support himself. He does not yet have the means to act on the larger ideas forming in his mind. The path to owning a ship seems distant, and the resources required appear beyond reach. Yet ambition, once awakened, rarely returns to rest. Aristotle continues to spend evenings near the docks, watching ships anchor and depart, allowing his mind to drift toward the possibilities that might one day become real. Each vessel becomes a symbol of what the future could hold: autonomy, influence, and the ability to move beyond the limitations that had shaped his early years. On certain nights, he walks the length of the harbor and counts the lights of anchored ships, imagining their routes and destinations. He thinks of the Mediterranean ports of his childhood, comparing them to the sprawling landscape before him. In Smyrna, the sea had been a constant presence, visible from hillsides and alleys, a backdrop to daily life. Here, the sea is a gateway to continents he has never visited, a reminder that the world is larger than any one place. This realization deepens his conviction that shipping, rather than tobacco alone, will define his future. But conviction alone is not enough. He must continue building experience, gathering knowledge, and preparing for the moment when circumstances allow him to act. One of the lessons he learns during this period is the importance of patience. Ships move slowly, and the business surrounding them follows its own deliberate rhythm. Cargo must be scheduled, inspected, and documented. Routes must be charted with care. Mechanical failures, weather delays, and economic downturns can alter plans in an instant. Through observation, Aristotle comes to understand that success in shipping requires not only vision and ambition, but also the ability to navigate uncertainty with measured resilience. He begins to adapt these lessons to his own life, viewing each small setback not as a failure, but as part of a broader journey towards something still beyond sight. As the years pass, the tobacco trade continues to occupy much of his time, yet he senses that its role in his life is temporary. The scent that once defined his daily routine now serves as a reminder of where he has been, rather than where he is going. Even so, he respects the opportunities it has provided. The trade taught him how markets adapt, how people negotiate, and how goods flow across continents. It introduced him to the networks that bind nations together through commerce. Most importantly, it gave him the confidence to believe he could rise from the hardships of his past and build a new life defined not by loss, but by purpose. One evening, as the sun sets behind the rows of warehouses, Aristotle stands at the edge of the port and watches a solitary ship cross the horizon. Its silhouette grows smaller with each passing moment, leaving behind a trail of ripples that fade into the darkening water. The sight captures him, not because of the ship itself, but because of what it represents. In that quiet moment, he understands with clarity that his future lies not in the world of small trades, but in the vast expanse of open water. The ship continues forward, moving steadily into the distance, as though guiding him toward the next chapter of his life. And it is that solitary ship, disappearing into the calm evening sea, that becomes the final image of this chapter. The solitary ship continues forward across the calm evening sea, its dark outline gradually dissolving into the horizon until only the faintest suggestion of movement remains. That distant vessel, shrinking against the vast expanse of water, lingers in the young Aristotle Onassis's mind long after it disappears from view. It becomes a symbol of possibility, a quiet reminder that somewhere beyond the horizon lie opportunities far greater than those currently within reach. Even as the night settles over the port of Buenos Aires and the sounds of the waterfront soften into background murmurs, he carries the image with him. It follows him through the narrow streets leading back to his modest room, accompanied by the steady rhythm of his footsteps on the cobblestones. In that fading silhouette, he senses a direction forming, an unspoken promise that the path ahead will one day open if he is willing to continue preparing for it. In the months that follow, Aristotle's daily life remains defined by work, observation, and deliberate patience. Yet his attention increasingly gravitates toward the shipping world. The tobacco trade had been his introduction to commerce in Buenos Aires, allowing him to learn the basic principles of negotiation and market behavior. But the scale of the tobacco business pales beside the immensity of the maritime industry. He senses that controlling the movement of goods, rather than the goods themselves, offers the greatest potential for growth. Each time he sees a ship leave the harbor, he feels a quiet pull toward the idea of participating in that larger system. He begins collecting information from newspapers, shipping bulletins, and conversations overheard near the docks, gradually forming a detailed understanding of global maritime trends. What he learns is both daunting and encouraging. The global economy of the early 1930s is under immense pressure as nations struggle with the consequences of financial collapse. Shipping companies face shrinking profits, reduced demand, and spiraling maintenance costs. Many vessels sit idle for months, rusting at their moorings while owners seek buyers who rarely appear. To most observers, this situation represents an industry in crisis, but Aristotle sees something different. He sees the same pattern that marked the aftermath of Smyrna's destruction. Where others perceive loss, there often lies hidden opportunity. Ships that once seemed unattainable suddenly become available at prices far lower than before. Though he cannot yet afford even the least expensive vessel, he recognizes that the world is shifting in ways that may one day allow him to enter the field. During this period, he forms relationships with individuals who possess experience in the maritime world. He befriends sailors who describe the challenges of life at sea, engineers who explain the mechanics of aging engines, and brokers who outline the complex negotiations behind ship purchases. These connections are not formal partnerships, but rather quiet exchanges of knowledge that take place in cafes, on the docks, or during breaks from work. Aristotle listens attentively, taking mental notes on everything from fuel consumption to hull conditions. Over time, he compiles a mental archive of information about vessels that may soon be offered for sale. His approach is not driven by impatience, but by careful preparation, rooted in the understanding that success often belongs to those who wait for the right moment rather than forcing an opportunity too soon. Meanwhile, his job at the telephone exchange continues to provide unexpected insights. Through the constant flow of calls, he hears snippets of commercial activity across continents. He hears urgency in the voices of traders seeking transport routes that no longer operate as reliably as before. He hears hesitation in the tone of ship owners worried about dwindling profits. He hears the subtle signals of markets shifting, allowing him to anticipate how maritime commerce will evolve in the coming years. These insights are not obvious to others, but Aristotle's background, shaped by loss, resilience, and the need to rebuild, allows him to perceive patterns that might otherwise go unnoticed. Gradually, Aristotle begins to place small investments in areas connected to trade, using his limited resources to test the waters of larger ventures. He is cautious, but not timid, always aware of the balance between risk and possibility. His early profits are modest, yet they reinforce his belief that careful strategy can lead to significant progress. Each successful deal, however small, strengthens his resolve to move beyond the confines of the tobacco market. In moments of reflection, he often returns to the memory of that solitary ship disappearing into the evening sea, a reminder that the future he envisions lies not in temporary trades, but in the control of vessels capable of crossing oceans. One of the pivotal realizations he reaches during these years is that the maritime industry is not simply a matter of buying and selling ships. It is an ecosystem shaped by politics, diplomacy, technology, and human endurance. Global tensions influence the flow of goods, new inventions alter the efficiency of fleets, and international agreements dictate which ports remain open or closed. Aristotle understands that to succeed in this complex environment, he must learn to navigate not only markets, but also the broader forces that govern them. This recognition becomes a cornerstone of his approach to business, the willingness to learn continuously and to view each detail, however small, as part of a larger structure. During quiet evenings, he walks again to the harbor, observing the vessels anchored under the pale glow of lamps. He notices how the water reflects the shapes of their hulls and how the shadows shift with the movements of the tide. He thinks about the men who command these ships, the companies that own them, and the decisions that determine their fate. Often he stands in silence, letting the scene sink in, understanding that he is still far from owning such a vessel, but closer than he once believed. The dream no longer feels distant or abstract. It feels like a destination toward which he is steadily, patiently moving. By the late 1930s, Aristotle has saved enough money to consider small investments related to maritime operations. He cannot yet purchase a ship, but he can participate in freight arrangements, import deals, or other transactions that involve the movement of goods across short distances. Each new step reinforces his understanding of logistics, documentation, and international regulations. The more he learns, the more he sees how small decisions create ripple effects across the entire system. He recognizes that the most successful ship owners are those who anticipate change before it arrives, and he resolves to develop that same ability in himself. Yet even with increasing experience, Aristotle knows that the path ahead remains uncertain. Global political tensions are rising, and the world edges closer to conflict. Shipping routes may soon become dangerous, and markets may shift rapidly. But he also knows that major world events, whether economic, political, or military, often create unexpected openings for those who are prepared. His life, shaped from youth by upheaval, has taught him that adversity can be a catalyst rather than a barrier. As he stands once more on the harbor's edge one evening, he observes a small tanker preparing to depart. Its engines emit a low hum, and the crew moves steadily across the deck as preparations are completed. The sight captures his attention, not because the ship is large or impressive, but because it is functional and essential. It is the type of vessel that keeps global commerce moving, regardless of economic conditions or political uncertainty. He watches as the tanker slowly pulls away from the dock, its lights glowing softly in the gathering dusk. The sound of its engines grows fainter as it moves toward the open water, leaving behind a gentle trail of ripples that shimmer briefly before fading. And it is that steady, determined hum, carrying the small tanker into the darkening sea, that becomes the final note of this chapter. The steady hum of the tanker lingers in the night air long after the vessel has slipped beyond the glow of the harbor lights. Its low vibration seems to travel across the water and into the quiet spaces of Buenos Aires, a reminder of a world that never sleeps, a world of constant movement and shifting tides. For Aristotle Onassis, that hum becomes a sound he cannot forget. It echoes in his mind as he walks back through the darkened streets, and it stays with him even as he sits alone beside the small table in his rented room. In that persistent, fading vibration, he feels an affirmation of the path he has chosen. It is a sound that reflects purpose, direction, and the promise of crossing from one stage of life to another. The tanker is not grand or celebrated, yet its departure carries the weight of industry and ambition, qualities he has come to value more deeply with each passing year. In the days that follow, the city continues its usual rhythm, but Aristotle's attention remains directed toward the maritime world. He has spent nearly a decade observing ships, studying markets, listening to the conversations of traders, and saving every possible coin. His desire to enter the shipping industry is no longer a distant imagination, but a goal that feels increasingly within reach. Still, he knows that careful steps are necessary. The global situation is becoming more volatile, and newspapers are filled with reports of tension across Europe. The uncertainty of the times has placed many ship owners in precarious positions, forcing them to consider selling vessels they can no longer afford to maintain. Yet even in these troubled conditions, Aristotle senses the arrival of a moment for those bold enough and prepared enough to act. He spends evenings reviewing the small notes he has accumulated over the years, ship names, conditions, sale histories, and the reputations of various owners. He has identified several older vessels lingering on the market, ships whose value has diminished with age and neglect. These vessels, though far from ideal, represent a realistic entry point for someone with limited capital. Aristotle knows that his first ship will not be modern or impressive. It will likely require repairs, careful management, and constant attention. But he also knows that owning even the humblest vessel would mark a turning point in his life. It would allow him to participate directly in the movement of goods across the world, transforming him from a small-scale trader into someone capable of shaping the roots and rhythms of commerce. Days turn into weeks, and Aristotle begins making quiet inquiries. He does not announce his intentions, nor does he seek attention. Instead, he approaches the task with the same patience and discretion that have guided him since leaving Smyrna. Through conversations with brokers and port workers, he learns of a particular vessel, an aging, modest cargo ship that has been sitting idle for months. The owner, strained by financial pressures, is eager to sell. Yet even at a reduced price, the ship remains far beyond what Aristotle can afford. He continues to save, continues to trade, and continues to watch the markets, waiting for the right moment to make his move. As the world edges closer to conflict, changes in global shipping begin to influence prices in unexpected ways. Some owners delay selling, hoping conditions will improve, while others accept losses to secure their remaining assets. Aristotle observes these patterns closely, recognizing that hesitation often opens paths for those who act decisively. When the opportunity finally arrives, a sudden drop in price caused by the seller's urgent need for liquidity, he moves quickly. Drawing on his savings, securing small loans, and negotiating with a persistence born from years of preparation, he reaches an agreement to purchase the ship. It is a moment he has imagined many times, yet when it arrives, he experiences it with quiet, steady resolve rather than celebration. The first time he stands before the vessel as its owner, he feels a mixture of pride and responsibility. The ship is weathered and in need of attention, with paint peeling along the hull and signs of age visible in its structure. But to him, it represents something far more significant than its appearance. It is a symbol of resilience, of rebuilding, of turning loss into opportunity. It is a vessel that will carry his name, his hopes, and his determination across the seas. He walks its length slowly, running his hand along the rail, taking in the details that will soon become familiar. The smell of salt, oil, and aging metal drifts through the air, creating a sensory landscape that feels both foreign and deeply connected to his past. The days that follow are filled with work. Repairs are arranged, crew members are hired, and contracts for cargo are sought. Aristotle immerses himself in every aspect of the process, refusing to leave crucial decisions in the hands of others. He understands that the success of his first voyage will depend not only on the ship itself, but on how effectively it is managed. The long hours, the constant challenges, and the uncertainty of each decision weigh on him, yet he perseveres with a calm focus. His past has taught him that perseverance is often the difference between success and failure, and he approaches each task with the same meticulous attention he once applied to the telephone exchange. When the day of the first departure arrives, he stands once more at the harbor's edge, watching as his ship prepares to leave. The atmosphere is different from that earlier night when he observed the tanker fade into the horizon. This time, the hum that fills the air is not distant but close, resonating through the deck beneath his feet and the rail beneath his hand. The vessel begins to move, slowly at first, then with greater certainty as it clears the dock. He remains still, absorbing the moment, listening to the sound of the engine as it carries the ship forward. It is not the start of an empire, nor the mark of extraordinary wealth. It is simply the first step, taken after years of preparation, guided by patience and quiet conviction. As the ship moves further from the quay, the hum deepens into a steady vibration that seems to echo the rhythm of Aristotle's own thoughts. The ripples spreading across the water reflect the growing clarity of his path. For the first time since the destruction of Smyrna, he feels firmly anchored to a future shaped by his own choices. The ship continues outward, its silhouette slowly becoming smaller, yet the sound of its journey remains distinct, carried across the water like a quiet promise of what lies ahead. And it is that persistent engine hum, deep, steady, and newly his, that closes this chapter of his story. The deep, steady hum of the engine echoes across the quiet harbor, fading slowly as Aristotle Onassis's first ship moves toward the open sea. That sound remains in his mind long after the vessel becomes a faint outline in the distance. It carries with it the weight of his earliest ambitions and the quiet pride of a young man who has managed, against all odds, to enter a world once far beyond his reach. Yet the hum also brings a deeper understanding. Ownership is only the beginning. A ship may carry its name across oceans, but its success depends on the choices, instincts, and resilience of the person guiding its future. As the last traces of the vessel's movement dissolve into the evening light, Aristotle reminds himself that this moment, historic as it feels, marks merely the start of a long and uncertain journey. In the weeks that follow the ship's departure, Aristotle devotes himself completely to managing its first voyage. Each day brings new responsibilities: handling communications with crew members, arranging cargo for the return trip, negotiating rates, and monitoring expenses down to the smallest detail. He works from modest offices near the port, where the walls bear the marks of years of humidity and salt carried inland by the wind. Yet within those worn surroundings, he builds the foundations of a business that he hopes will one day stretch across continents. He studies freight patterns, tracks delivery times, and learns to anticipate delays caused by storms, mechanical issues, or economic fluctuations. His success depends not on luck, but on observation, preparation, and an unyielding willingness to learn. As the ship begins its early rotations, Aristotle faces the realities of maritime operations. Mechanical failures demand repairs, contracts require renegotiation, and unexpected expenses threaten to erode the slim margins he carefully calculated. Crew members come and go, each bringing their own expectations, habits, and stories from the sea. Some voyages return with modest profit, others yield barely enough to cover the costs. But Aristotle approaches each challenge with calm determination. His experience as a refugee has taught him to view hardship not as a signal of defeat, but as a temporary barrier that can be overcome with persistence. When difficulties arise, he responds not with frustration, but with careful adjustments, making decisions that strengthen his knowledge and sharpen his judgment. Slowly, the early voyages begin to stabilize. Contracts become more reliable, repairs grow less frequent, and the ship's routes become familiar. Aristotle's reputation, still modest, begins to spread through the shipping community of Buenos Aires. Brokers note his discipline, crew members remark on his fairness, and traders appreciate his consistency. Though he does not yet command influence, he is no longer an unknown figure. He has taken his first steps into a field dominated by larger, older companies, and each passing month strengthens his position. Still, he knows that one ship is far from enough. To grow, he must expand, acquiring additional vessels and establishing routes that offer greater returns. But expansion requires capital, and capital is scarce in a world still shaken by economic uncertainty. As global tensions intensify toward the late 1930s, the maritime landscape shifts yet again. Nations prepare for conflict, trade patterns tighten, and the risks of international shipping increase. Some ship owners seek to exit the industry before conditions worsen, while others hold tightly to their fleets in anticipation of potential wartime contracts. Aristotle observes these developments with care. His instinct tells him that the coming years will reshape the shipping industry, presenting both dangers and opportunities. He senses that those who act decisively and wisely may be able to navigate the upheaval to their advantage. It is during this period that Aristotle begins exploring the possibility of acquiring a second ship. He studies the lists of vessels offered for sale, examines repair logs, and travels to nearby ports when needed. The process is slow, often discouraging, and filled with negotiations that seem endless. Sellers attempt to raise prices, brokers complicate dealings, and many ships prove unfit upon inspection. Yet Aristotle remains unshaken. He has learned from his first purchase that persistence is essential. He continues searching, aware that the right opportunity often appears only after many disappointments. Eventually, he finds a second vessel, larger than his first, sturdier, and more capable of handling longer routes. It is not without faults, but it holds the promise of becoming a reliable addition to his emerging fleet. Negotiations are tense, requiring him to leverage every bit of financial flexibility he has earned. He approaches the process with calm, measured confidence, making clear that he will not be rushed or manipulated. When the deal is finally secured, he stands on the deck of the new ship and feels once again the hum of an engine beneath his feet. It is a familiar vibration, but this time it resonates differently. It signals growth, expansion, and the gradual shaping of a vision he has carried since his earliest days in Buenos Aires. The addition of the second ship introduces new complexities. More crew members must be hired, additional contracts secured, and maintenance schedules coordinated. Aristotle increases his working hours, often rising before dawn and returning home long after nightfall. He eats simple meals, spends little on comforts, and reinvests everything into the business. The discipline that defined his early years now becomes the foundation of his strategy. He understands that shipping is not a pursuit for those seeking quick wealth. It requires patience, endurance, and a willingness to face unpredictable challenges. The First and Second World Wars often reshaped the fortunes of those tied to the sea, and Aristotle soon discovers this truth firsthand. Some routes become dangerous, insurance rates climb, and governments impose restrictions on maritime activity. Yet through these challenges, he finds opportunities to strengthen his position. He adapts routes to minimize risk, secures agreements with traders who require dependable transport, and learns to anticipate the needs of markets unsettled by conflict. His decisions are not without risk, but he makes them with clarity, guided by a deep understanding of the industry's rhythms. Over time, his fleet expands from 2 vessels to 3, then 4, each acquisition reflecting years of careful planning rather than sudden fortune. By the time he enters his 30s, Aristotle Onassis has transformed himself from a refugee with scarce resources into a rising figure in international shipping. His office, though still modest, now hums with activity. Charts line the walls, schedules fill his desk, and every day brings messages from ports across the world. His work no longer revolves around small trades or local negotiations. He is beginning to operate on a global scale, navigating the complexities of international commerce with increasing confidence. Yet the hum that began this chapter, the hum of the ship that carried his earliest hopes, remains constant in his memory. It is the sound that marked his first step into a world that would one day know his name. And as his fleet grows and his responsibilities deepen, that hum continues to guide him, reminding him of a simple truth. Every journey, no matter how vast, begins with a single vessel moving steadily into the unknown. And it is that steady, growing hum, now echoed by more than one ship, that brings this chapter to a close. The steady, growing hum of multiple ships becomes a new and familiar backdrop to Aristotle Onassis's life, echoing across harbors where his vessels now operate. It is no longer a single vibration in the distance, but a layered chorus of engines, each one carrying cargo, responsibility, and the weight of his steadily increasing ambitions. These sounds merge into a rhythm that marks the progression of time in his world. Every departure and arrival signals a new calculation, a new opportunity, and a new test of the enterprise he has built from almost nothing. As he stands near the waterfront listening to those overlapping tones drift across the water, he senses that he has entered a stage of life where the foundation he once dreamed of is finally taking shape. Yet he also understands that the path ahead will require more than persistence and instinct. It will demand a deeper resilience as global events begin to reshape the world around him. Through the late 1930s, the international climate grows increasingly unstable. Political tensions across Europe intensify, alliances shift, and newspapers carry headlines that foreshadow conflict. The maritime industry feels the tremors of uncertainty long before war officially erupts. Ship owners grapple with rising insurance costs, governments place restrictions on trade, and routes once considered safe become unpredictable. For many, this is a time of retreat, a moment to minimize risk and preserve whatever assets remain secure. But Aristotle sees the situation differently. His experiences of loss during the fall of Smyrna taught him that crises often reveal openings hidden from those overwhelmed by fear. He recognizes that while war brings danger, it also reshapes global commerce in ways that can allow smaller, agile operators to expand where larger companies falter. As the Second World War begins, shipping becomes one of the most volatile yet essential industries in the world. Nations require supplies, neutral countries seek reliable transport, and damaged fleets create shortages that alter the balance of global trade. Aristotle navigates this new reality with caution, adjusting routes to avoid conflict zones while seeking opportunities to serve markets that remain active. He studies maritime reports with intensified focus, analyzes political developments, and consults with contacts who provide information from across different ports. His decisions are deliberate, shaped by the understanding that a single miscalculation could jeopardize everything he has built. Yet even under these conditions, he maintains the quiet, steady discipline that has defined his approach since his earliest days in Buenos Aires. Owning a small fleet during wartime presents challenges that extend beyond the usual uncertainties of maritime commerce. Fuel becomes scarce, repairs require greater ingenuity, and recruitment of experienced crew members grows increasingly difficult. Aristotle responds by strengthening his management structure. He develops clearer systems for maintenance, hires trusted personnel to oversee daily operations, and establishes relationships with shipyards capable of handling repairs swiftly and efficiently. He understands that reliability becomes one of the most valued qualities in times of crisis. Traders, suppliers, and brokers prefer to work with owners who demonstrate stability, and Aristotle ensures that his vessels meet those expectations, even when circumstances are strained. During these years, he also encounters the harsh realities of maritime loss. Reports reach him of ships belonging to other companies that have been damaged or sunk, often with little warning. Each incident serves as a stark reminder of the risks inherent in the industry. He grieves quietly when news arrives of crew members elsewhere who have gone missing at sea, understanding that every person aboard a vessel carries with them a world of connections, families, memories, and hopes that may never find closure. Though his fleet manages to avoid the worst of the conflict, he remains acutely aware of the fragility of success during such turbulent times. As the war progresses, Aristotle begins to see changes in market dynamics that signal new possibilities. With many of the world's commercial fleets damaged, governments and private companies alike anticipate a need for rapid rebuilding once peace is restored. Shipyards in Europe and North America prepare for increased demand, while traders across the globe identify routes that will surge with activity in the post-war years. Aristotle, watching these developments closely, understands that the end of the conflict will bring a moment of profound transformation. Those who prepare early will be positioned to benefit from the reconstruction boom that seems increasingly inevitable. By the early 1940s, he begins planning for that future. He studies the availability of surplus vessels, learns about shipbuilding programs initiated by various governments, and analyzes how global demand for commodities may shift when trade routes reopen. His vision expands beyond operating a handful of ships. He imagines a larger fleet, modern, efficient, and capable of serving both commercial and industrial markets. He develops preliminary calculations, projecting costs and potential returns, even though many uncertainties still cloud the horizon. His strategy is shaped not by impatience, but by anticipation, the same quality that guided him during his early years watching the docks of Buenos Aires. The war continues to impose constraints, but Aristotle moves steadily toward his long-term objectives. He develops stronger relationships with financial institutions, traders, and maritime brokers. Though still a relatively young man, he has matured into a figure whose presence commands quiet respect. His perseverance, reliability, and disciplined approach have become recognized traits among those who work with him. Yet he remains grounded, aware that success is never permanent and that every period of stability is followed by new challenges. When the war finally begins to turn toward its conclusion, the global shipping industry stands on the brink of enormous change. Fleets across Europe require rebuilding, ports must be repaired, and new trade agreements will reshape the flow of goods across continents. Aristotle sees these developments with clarity. He recognizes that the world is preparing for a transition, and he plans carefully for the moment when he can act decisively. He begins identifying vessels that may soon be offered for sale, studying not only their condition, but their potential roles in a post-war economy eager for reconstruction. In the final months of the conflict, he reflects on the journey that has carried him from the ashes of Smyrna to the growing responsibilities of a shipowner. The hum of his expanding fleet, once a distant vibration, now forms a steady, grounding presence in his life. It is the sound of progress, of sustained effort, and of a vision slowly becoming reality. He knows that the next steps will shape not only his business, but his entire future. The post-war world will offer opportunities unlike any he has encountered before, and he intends to meet them with the same quiet determination that guided him from the very beginning. As he stands again by the harbor at dusk, the engines of his ships preparing for another round of voyages, their deep vibrations blend into a single, resonant tone that fills the evening air. It is a tone that speaks not only of the present, but of what is still to come. And it is that steady, resonant vibration, gathered from all the ships he now commands, that brings this chapter to a gentle close. The steady, resonant vibration that rises from Aristotle Onassis's growing fleet lingers in the air as the world around him begins to emerge from the long darkness of war. It is a sound filled with promise, yet it carries the weight of uncertainty. The engines thrum with a sense of readiness, as though the vessels themselves understand that global commerce is about to be reshaped in ways unseen for generations. As Aristotle listens to that layered hum, he feels the slow shift in history unfolding around him. The war that has consumed nations is drawing to a close, and the outlines of a new era begin to appear like faint light breaking across the horizon. For a man who has built his success on patience, observation, and decisive action, this transitional moment feels familiar, echoing the many thresholds he has crossed since leaving Smyrna as a teenager. The world emerging from conflict is marked by ruins and rebuilding, by the remnants of destruction and the early stirrings of recovery. Cities across Europe are scarred by bombings, ports lie in disrepair, and supply chains once taken for granted have been fractured. Yet amid the devastation, there is movement, slow at first, then more insistent, as nations begin the complex task of restoring commerce. Shipyards long focused on wartime production shift toward constructing new merchant fleets. Governments establish reconstruction programs, industries reopen their doors, and demand for raw materials surges. The foundations of a worldwide economic revival are being laid, and Aristotle recognizes the magnitude of what lies ahead. He travels frequently during these years, moving between South America, the United States, and Europe, assessing the condition of shipyards and examining vessels that may soon become available. The war has left behind a vast surplus of ships that governments no longer require. Many of these vessels, though plain and utilitarian, are structurally sound and built to endure long voyages. Aristotle sees in them the potential to expand his operations at a scale previously unimaginable. While other ship owners express caution, still shaken by the losses of the war years, he approaches the market with quiet clarity. He understands that the key to future success lies in acquiring ships at the moment when their value is lowest, then positioning them to serve the growing global demand. His strategy leads him to the United States, where surplus Liberty ships and tankers are being offered at prices far below their construction cost. These vessels, designed for efficiency and rapid production, are not elegant, but they are reliable and capable of carrying large quantities of cargo or fuel. Aristotle studies their specifications carefully, walking the decks of ship after ship, assessing their potential. He consults engineers, negotiates with government officials, and arranges financial structures that allow him to purchase multiple vessels in a short period of time. Each acquisition represents not only an expansion of his fleet, but also a step toward establishing himself as one of the major figures in post-war shipping. With each new vessel added to his company, the hum that has defined his life grows stronger. It becomes a symbol of momentum, carrying him into a phase of rapid growth. His operations expand across oceans, connecting ports from South America to Europe, from the Mediterranean to the Middle East. Contracts increase, routes lengthen, and his reputation deepens. He becomes known for his willingness to take calculated risks and for his uncanny ability to anticipate market conditions. Though he still maintains the steady discipline that marked his early years, his presence in the global shipping industry is no longer modest. He is becoming a force, recognized for both his ambition and his skill. Yet the post-war years bring not only opportunity but also complexity. Petroleum begins to dominate global commerce, and the world's reliance on oil grows at a remarkable pace. Refineries expand, new markets emerge, and the demand for tanker transport increases dramatically. Aristotle sees this development clearly. He understands that the future of shipping will be shaped not by small cargo vessels, but by massive tankers capable of carrying vast quantities of crude oil across continents. He begins shifting his investments accordingly, exploring new tanker designs and negotiating with shipbuilders to create vessels that surpass existing standards. His vision expands beyond the present, reaching toward a future where size and efficiency dominate maritime transport. But with great opportunity comes great risk. The tanker industry is fiercely competitive, shaped by fluctuating oil prices, political tensions, and the interests of powerful companies. Entering this arena requires not only financial strength, but also diplomatic skill and strategic foresight. Aristotle approaches these challenges with the same quiet resilience that carried him through earlier trials. He studies international petroleum markets, builds relationships with oil-producing nations, and anticipates shifts in demand long before they occur. His ability to read the global landscape gives him an advantage, allowing him to position his fleet where it will be most effective. By the late 1940s, Aristotle Onassis has transformed himself from a modest shipowner into a major player in international shipping. His fleet has grown significantly, his influence has expanded, and his business operations now reach across the world. He has mastered the art of navigating global markets while maintaining a personal focus that keeps him grounded. Yet even as success deepens, he remains aware that the world of commerce is never static. New competitors emerge, political tensions reappear, and technological innovations begin reshaping the industry. He cannot rely on past achievements alone. The next decade will demand new strategies, new alliances, and new levels of resilience. During this period of expansion, he also begins to attract attention beyond the shipping industry. Newspapers mention his name more frequently, describing him as a rising figure in international commerce. His successes create curiosity, and people begin to wonder about the man behind the growing fleet. But Aristotle remains private, speaking little about his personal life. He continues working long hours, analyzing data, planning new acquisitions, and nurturing the relationships that sustain his operations. Even as wealth increases, he avoids extravagance. His focus remains fixed on the future, which he believes holds far greater potential than anything he has yet achieved. Yet change is coming, and it approaches slowly, like a tide rising beneath the surface. The hum of his growing fleet still fills the air, but within that rumble lies the faint suggestion of new chapters. Chapters shaped not only by business, but by the personal relationships and public attention that will soon enter his life. For now, however, the sound remains steady, and Aristotle stands on the threshold of a new period defined by ambition, recognition, and the unprecedented expansion of a shipping empire. And it is that deep, expanding hum, carrying hints of both opportunity and transformation, that brings this chapter to a gentle close. The deep, expanding hum that fills the air around Aristotle Onassis's growing fleet carries with it a quiet sense of inevitability. It is the sound of a man approaching the threshold of a new era, an era in which his name will no longer belong only to the world of business, but will soon enter conversations far beyond the docks, shipyards, and maritime offices he has inhabited for years. That hum, once faint in the early days of Buenos Aires, now resonates across oceans, reflecting the magnitude of the enterprise he has built. Yet within that same steady vibration lies a subtle shift, a signal that the vast world of commerce is preparing to intersect with the equally complex world of society, wealth, and public fascination, areas that will shape his life in ways even he cannot yet fully imagine. As he steps deeper into the post-war years, Aristotle finds himself drawn increasingly into international circles where politics, economics, and culture converge. His growing influence in the shipping industry means that he is invited to conferences, forums, and gatherings attended by diplomats, financiers, and industrial leaders. Though he remains cautious with his words and measured in his behavior, these interactions broaden his understanding of the forces that shape not just trade, but global relationships. He begins to grasp how closely the fortunes of nations are tied to the availability of energy, how geopolitical tensions influence oil routes, and how sudden shifts in leadership can redefine international agreements. This awareness strengthens his conviction that the future of shipping lies in the expanding petroleum trade, a sector where he has already begun laying the foundations of his next major endeavor. With this understanding comes a heightened awareness of the need to cultivate alliances beyond the maritime world. Aristotle begins traveling more frequently, attending meetings in Europe and South America, visiting oil producers in the Middle East, and observing the growing American influence in global trade. These journeys expose him to the varied landscapes of the post-war world, cities rising from rubble, ports undergoing reconstruction, and economic centers reshaping themselves to support the needs of a changing century. Everywhere he goes, he listens carefully, absorbs details, and observes how different countries position themselves in the emerging global order. His goal is not simply to build a larger fleet, but to position it at the very center of the world's most vital commercial currents. During these travels, he also encounters communities of expatriates, businessmen, and social figures who move between continents with ease. Many are drawn to him, impressed by his disciplined rise from refugee to international shipowner. Yet Aristotle maintains a cautious distance. He is aware that admiration can quickly become expectation, and that attention, once gained, can evolve into scrutiny. For now, he prefers to focus on work, ensuring that his growing business remains stable and adaptable. But the world around him is changing, and the circles he enters begin to shape his image in ways he cannot entirely control. It is in this period that Aristotle Onassis's personal life begins to shift as well. Though he has long maintained a private and almost solitary existence, the expanding demands of his work bring him into contact with people whose lives move at a different rhythm from the world of shipyards and freight offices. He attends receptions hosted by diplomats, dinners held by industrial leaders, and gatherings where art, music, and politics intertwine. These encounters introduce him to men and women who are comfortable in rooms shaped by influence, wealth, and legacy. Though Aristotle remains somewhat guarded, he is not unaffected by these environments. He begins to observe the subtleties of social dynamics, the unspoken rules of elite circles, and the ways in which personal connections can shape economic decisions. Through these experiences, he also becomes more aware of the role reputation plays in business. While he once believed that hard work and strategic thinking were the only ingredients necessary for success, he now sees that visibility and recognition carry their own weight. The mention of a name at the right moment, the perception of stability or ambition, the association with influential figures, all can open doors that remain closed to those who stay hidden. Aristotle does not seek fame, but he does not dismiss the quiet power it can provide. He begins to navigate these currents carefully, ensuring that his growing prominence enhances rather than complicates his business endeavors. As his fleet expands and his network deepens, Aristotle invests more heavily in oil tankers, recognizing that the world's appetite for petroleum will only increase. He negotiates contracts with refineries, oil-producing nations, and distribution companies, establishing routes that span continents. The tankers he commissions are larger than any he has previously owned, built to withstand demanding conditions and to carry enormous quantities of crude oil across vast distances. Each new vessel strengthens his position, transforming his company into a formidable force in the global energy trade. Yet even as his business flourishes, Aristotle senses that he is approaching a turning point. The hum of his growing tanker fleet, once merely a sound of aspiration, begins to shape a new kind of rhythm, one that blends commerce with identity, ambition with visibility. The world is starting to take notice, not only of the fleet itself, but of the man who has orchestrated its growth. Articles begin to appear in newspapers, describing him as bold, decisive, and unusually perceptive. His financial success becomes a topic of discussion among those who study global markets. And though he remains disciplined and grounded, Aristotle cannot ignore the reality that public curiosity is beginning to shape the way people view him. He continues working tirelessly, maintaining his routines, overseeing his growing enterprise, and monitoring every shift in international commerce. Yet beneath the steady cadence of daily operations, the edges of a new chapter begin to form. A chapter that will move him from relative anonymity into a world where wealth intersects with society, where influence meets expectation, and where personal relationships begin to play a role as significant as financial decisions. This new era will introduce him to figures whose names carry weight around the world, and it will lead him into the complex social landscapes of Europe and the Americas. As he stands once more on a shoreline, this time not in Buenos Aires, but in a European port, he watches one of his tankers glide steadily across the water. The vessel's size dwarfs those he once dreamed of owning. Its engines produce a deep, unbroken hum that resonates through the ground beneath his feet. The sound is strong, powerful, and full, reflecting the scale his life has now reached. Yet within that hum lies the faint suggestion of silence, the silence that precedes change. And it is that deep, powerful hum, balanced by the quiet hint of transformation, that brings this chapter to a reflective close. The deep, powerful hum of the tanker drifts into the air, carrying with it the faint suggestion of transformation that lingers in the silence between departures. That silence, subtle yet unmistakable, feels like the pause before a doorway opens. Aristotle Onassis senses it even as he watches the vessel continue its steady journey across the water. He has spent years mastering the world of commerce, navigating economic storms, and expanding his fleet with deliberate precision. But now, standing on the edge of a European port surrounded by voices from many nations, he feels the quiet pull of a different kind of current, one that will guide him beyond the purely commercial realm into the complex landscape of public life, social visibility, and personal decisions that extend far beyond the logic of business. In the years that follow the end of the Second World War, Europe becomes a gathering place for diplomats, industrial leaders, cultural figures, and the wealthy individuals who move with ease between continents. Cities like Paris, London, and Monte Carlo attract people seeking to rebuild their lives, strengthen alliances, and celebrate the return of peace. Aristotle finds himself traveling frequently among these places, not because he seeks glamour, but because many of the world's post-war negotiations occur in these circles. The oil companies he works with, the governments he must collaborate with, and the financiers who support large-scale maritime investments all gather in the same rooms where international society quietly reassembles itself. It is within this world that Aristotle's personal life begins to take on new dimensions. He meets individuals who are not simply businessmen or political figures, but heirs, artists, socialites, and cultural icons whose presence shapes gatherings in ways that are both subtle and profound. Among them is a woman from one of the wealthiest and most influential families in the region, Athina Livanos, the young daughter of shipping magnate Stavros Livanos. Their first encounters are polite and brief, shaped more by circumstance than intention. Yet over time, Aristotle finds himself drawn to her quiet poise and the sense of connection she maintains to a family deeply rooted in the maritime world. Their conversations, though simple at first, carry an ease that surprises him. The Livanos family occupies a prominent position in Greek shipping, and their presence in Europe's social circles is both respected and influential. For Aristotle, who has fought for every step of his rise, the Livanos name represents a world of heritage and generational continuity that he has never known. He approaches the relationship with a mixture of sincerity and caution, aware that blending business and personal life requires careful balance. Yet as he spends more time with Athena, he discovers a sense of companionship that has been largely absent from his adult life. Her calm demeanor contrasts with the constant movement that defines his own days, creating a space where he can speak freely without the demands of negotiation or strategy. Their courtship unfolds gradually, shaped by quiet meetings, shared travels, and the recognition that they come from different but complementary worlds. Aristotle admires Athena's grounded nature, her understanding of maritime families, and the dignity she carries despite her youth. Athena, in turn, sees in him a depth of experience and a determination forged through adversity, qualities that distinguish him from many of the men who drift through the social gatherings she attends. The bond between them strengthens not through dramatic gestures, but through steady, thoughtful connection. When they eventually marry, the event draws attention from shipping circles across the Mediterranean and Europe. For Aristotle, it marks not only the expansion of his personal life, but also a merging of two powerful maritime lineages. Yet he remains mindful of the challenges that come with such a union. He is no longer the young refugee who arrived in Buenos Aires with little more than determination. He is now a man whose name carries weight, whose business decisions affect thousands, and whose personal life is increasingly watched by others. Married life introduces new rhythms to his world. The couple divides their time between residences in Europe, spending periods in Greece where Aristotle maintains a strong connection to his homeland, and traveling between the ports where his business operations continue to grow. Athena adapts to the demands of a life shaped by global commerce, while Aristotle learns to appreciate the moments of calm that marriage brings. The birth of their two children, Alexander and Christina, brings a depth of emotion that lies far beyond the realm of business. Aristotle approaches fatherhood with a reflective seriousness, aware of how tragedies in his early life shaped him and determined to offer his children a foundation defined not by loss, but by opportunity. Yet even as his personal life expands, the pressures of the global shipping industry intensify. Competition sharpens, petroleum companies demand greater efficiency, and political uncertainties influence trade routes. Aristotle devotes long hours to planning, negotiating, and overseeing the construction of the massive tankers that he believes will define the future of global transport. These vessels require extraordinary resources, sophisticated engineering, and the willingness to push beyond conventional limits. But his determination remains unwavering. He sees in them a vision of the next generation of maritime commerce, a vision that few others have the courage to pursue with the same intensity. During these years, he becomes increasingly visible on the international stage. His name appears in newspapers, financial journals, and industry analyses. Photographs capture him at ports, in meetings, or arriving at social events alongside Athena. Public curiosity grows, and with it comes the subtle strain of living under observation. Aristotle navigates this visibility with measured restraint, never giving more information than necessary, and always maintaining a sense of privacy. Yet he understands that public attention is now part of his reality, something that will only increase as his business and personal life continue to evolve. As the 1950s progress, Aristotle continues expanding his fleet, strengthening his position in the global tanker market. His decisions propel him into the center of international commerce, and his influence grows to a level few shipowners have achieved. Yet the hum that follows him, the constant vibration of engines, the quiet signal of ships moving across oceans, remains a grounding force. It reminds him of the long road from Smyrna, the early years of hardship, the endless nights spent studying markets, and the first modest vessel that set this entire journey into motion. But beneath the surface, change continues to gather. The world of high society, public attention, and personal relationships will soon intersect with his life in ways that bring both joy and profound difficulty. The boundaries between business success and personal turmoil will blur, leading to developments that will shape not only his fate, but the fate of his entire family. And it is that quiet blending, the merging hum of industry and the whisper of approaching change, that brings this chapter to a thoughtful close. The quiet blending of industry's steady hum with the whisper of approaching change lingers in the air, creating a mood that feels both expectant and uncertain. Aristotle Onassis senses this shift even as he continues expanding his business and building a life defined by global movement. The world he inhabits is now far more visible than the one he once occupied in the early days of Buenos Aires. Social circles follow his travels, journalists note his business ventures, and his marriage to Athina Livanos places him firmly within the constellation of wealthy European families, whose lives attract constant attention. Yet beneath this surface of success, subtle tensions begin to emerge, tensions shaped by the pressures of public life, the demands of business, and the strains that accompany prosperity. In the early years of their marriage, Aristotle and Athena share a life of travel and shared purpose. Their children, Alexander and Christina, bring moments of quiet joy that stand in contrast to the relentless pace of Aristotle's work. He takes pride in their presence, often pausing during demanding business days to reflect on the family he is creating. But as his responsibilities grow and his ambitions expand, the time he devotes to his family inevitably becomes limited. Long periods spent at sea, in boardrooms, or negotiating in distant capitals create spaces of absence that Athena feels more deeply with each passing year. Their lives gradually shift into separate orbits. Aristotle's world is defined by strategy, risk, and relentless movement, while Athena seeks stability, companionship, and a quieter family life. European society, with its gatherings, expectations, and unspoken rules, adds another layer of complexity. The constant scrutiny can be exhausting, and even moments meant for relaxation often carry a sense of display. The distance between the couple becomes apparent not through a single event, but through the quiet accumulation of days shaped by different priorities. Though they remain connected by their children and their shared history, the pressures that surround them grow difficult to ignore. Meanwhile, Aristotle's business enters a new phase of competition. Other shipping magnates pursue the same markets, and the demand for increasingly large tankers pushes engineering and financing to unprecedented levels. Aristotle thrives on these pressures, finding in them the challenge that keeps him moving forward. He negotiates with shipyards capable of constructing vessels longer, wider, and more powerful than any he has commissioned before. He works with oil companies seeking reliable transport for expanding markets, and he continues to build relationships with government leaders whose influence directs the flow of global trade. His fleet grows, and with it grows the recognition that he is no longer simply a successful shipowner, but a central figure in the industry's evolution. Public fascination intensifies. Newspapers describe him as bold and charismatic, a man whose rise from refugee to magnate embodies a kind of modern mythology. Stories of his business decisions circulate widely, sometimes accurately, sometimes exaggerated, and sometimes entirely invented. His presence at social events becomes a subject of interest, especially as rumors emerge of his friendship with the celebrated opera singer Maria Callas. Their paths first cross in the mid-1950s at social gatherings in Europe, where music, culture, and wealth intersect. Maria, already acclaimed for her voice and artistry, carries an aura that captivates audiences around the world. Aristotle, drawn to her intelligence and presence, finds in her conversation a depth that stands apart from the circles he often moves through. At first, their interactions are brief, marked by polite exchanges and shared attendance at events. But over time, their conversations lengthen, shaped by a sense of mutual curiosity. Maria speaks of her demanding artistry, her grueling rehearsals, and the emotional weight of performing for the world. Aristotle listens with the same attentiveness he once gave to the telephone lines of Buenos Aires, absorbing the nuances of a world very different from his own. Their bond strengthens quietly, built not on dramatic declarations, but on a gradual recognition of kindred spirits. Two individuals who understand the pressures of rising to extraordinary heights and who carry within them the scars of past struggles. As their friendship deepens, it becomes increasingly visible. Their presence together at events draws attention, and speculation begins to swirl through newspapers and social circles. Athena, aware of the growing closeness between her husband and the opera star, feels its impact on their marriage. The distance that had been forming slowly now gains sharper edges. Aristotle, caught between the life he has built and the emotional connection he has discovered, faces decisions that affect not only his future, but the future of his family. His relationship with Maria brings him companionship, intellectual engagement, and a sense of renewal, yet it also introduces complexities that reach far beyond personal emotion. Inevitably, the quiet tensions that have accumulated find their culmination. Aristotle and Athena's marriage weakens under the weight of public attention and private strain. Their relationship, once full of possibility, now becomes defined by separation rather than partnership. By the late 1950s, they part ways, and the end of their marriage becomes known across the world. For Aristotle, the experience carries a mixture of sorrow and acceptance. He has always known that the path he chose, marked by ambition, movement, and global visibility, would carry personal costs. Yet the end of his marriage marks a significant turning point, one that reshapes not only his personal life, but also the relationships that will follow. Maria Callas becomes a central figure in this new chapter. Their connection deepens into a relationship that commands international attention. The opera star, known for her dramatic roles and extraordinary voice, finds in Aristotle a partner who understands the demands of excellence and the loneliness that can accompany public life. Together, they form a pairing that symbolizes glamour, power, and artistic brilliance. Yet beneath the surface, their relationship is not immune to the pressures of their respective worlds. Their lives, though intertwined, remain shaped by commitments, obligations, and ambitions that often move in different directions. During this period, Aristotle continues to expand his business, commissioning some of the largest tankers ever built and exploring new ventures that extend beyond shipping. But even as he pushes forward with determination, the world around him begins to change once more. The increasing attention on his personal life brings new challenges. His relationship with Maria becomes a subject of global fascination, and the spotlight that once illuminated his business achievements now often focuses on his private affairs. This attention, though sometimes flattering, also introduces strain, both for him and for those closest to him. Yet through it all, the hum of his fleet remains. It drifts across the ports where his ships anchor, the offices where his plans take shape, and the quiet moments where he contemplates the decisions ahead. It is a sound that reminds him of his origins, his journey, and the choices that have defined his life. And it is that persistent hum, now tinged with the echoes of personal transformation, that brings this chapter to a contemplative close. The persistent hum of Aristotle Onassis's fleet lingers in the background, tinged now with the echoes of personal transformation that have begun to shape his life. It is a hum that once represented ambition and forward momentum, but in these years it also reflects a tension between the public image he projects and the private emotions that move quietly beneath the surface. The world sees him as a figure of extraordinary success, a man who has risen from the ashes of Smyrna to command one of the most influential shipping empires on earth. Yet behind the polished appearances and confident negotiations lies a man increasingly pulled between the responsibilities of his career and the complexities of relationships that have grown steadily more entangled. His bond with Maria Callas continues to draw international fascination. Their relationship, built on mutual admiration and emotional understanding, becomes both a sanctuary and a storm. Maria, celebrated around the world for her dramatic voice and extraordinary artistry, carries the emotional intensity of someone who pours her entire being into her work. Aristotle, drawn to that intensity, finds in her a companion who understands the pressures of global recognition and the loneliness that can accompany a life lived under constant scrutiny. Yet the very qualities that make Maria remarkable also bring fragility. The demands of her career, the sacrifices she has made for her art, and the emotional depth that defines her performances shape a relationship that is as complicated as it is compelling. Aristotle is not immune to these complexities. His life, already divided between continents, business negotiations, and public expectations, becomes further fractured as he attempts to navigate the shifting balance between his growing connection with Maria and the responsibilities he carries as a father. Though separated from Athena, he remains deeply attached to his children, Alexander and Christina. Their presence brings him a sense of grounding that no business achievement can replicate. He watches them grow with a mixture of pride and concern, aware that the world they inhabit is far different from the one he knew as a child. For them, there are no memories of loss, no experience of displacement, no early years marked by hardship. Instead, they grow up surrounded by comfort, resources, and attention, gifts he worked tirelessly to provide, yet ones that sometimes create challenges of their own. During these years, Aristotle begins to divide his time more carefully. He arranges extended visits with his children, ensuring that they spend periods with him wherever his work allows. He introduces them to the world of shipping, taking them aboard vessels and explaining the mechanics of the trade. He wants them to understand not only the wealth they have inherited, but the effort that created it. Yet he also senses that the pressures of their family's public life weigh heavily on them. Alexander, bright and spirited, shows a fascination with aviation and mechanics, while Christina, sensitive and perceptive, often seeks her father's reassurance in moments when the intensity of public attention becomes overwhelming. Meanwhile, Aristotle's business empire continues to expand. His tanker fleet grows larger, more advanced, and more critical to the transport of oil across the world. He negotiates contracts with major oil-producing nations, navigates shifting political landscapes, and invests in new technologies that push the boundaries of maritime engineering. In boardrooms and at diplomatic gatherings, he remains a commanding presence, sharp, analytical, and focused. Yet even as his commercial influence reaches unprecedented levels, he feels the growing weight of decisions that can shift the course of entire markets. The stakes are higher now, both financially and politically, and each negotiation carries a complexity that reflects the interconnected nature of a rapidly globalizing world. These professional pressures coincide with increasing strain in his personal life. The attention surrounding his relationship with Maria intensifies, often eclipsing discussions of his business achievements. The media portrays their bond in dramatic terms, capturing photographs, stirring speculation, and creating narratives that amplify both admiration and controversy. For Maria, whose artistic career already involves immense emotional vulnerability, this spotlight becomes especially difficult. Her relationship with Aristotle, while deeply meaningful, places her under scrutiny that often extends beyond her performances. For Aristotle, the situation creates a conflict between the privacy he values and the public attention he cannot avoid. As the late 1950s transition into the early 1960s, the world changes once again. New figures rise to prominence, new global alliances take shape, and new cultural movements reshape society's expectations. In this evolving landscape, Aristotle crosses paths with individuals whose influence reaches into politics, diplomacy, and the highest levels of Western society. Among these figures are members of the Kennedy family, whose presence in American political life becomes one of the defining forces of the decade. Aristotle's interactions with them begin innocently enough. Occasional meetings at diplomatic gatherings, shared attendance at international events, but they carry a subtle resonance that will soon grow far more significant. During this period, Aristotle becomes increasingly aware of the delicate balance between public perception and private decision-making. His relationship with Maria continues, yet it is shadowed by uncertainties neither can fully escape. Maria's artistic commitments require her to travel constantly, while the demands of Aristotle's business keep him moving between continents. Their lives intersect intensely but intermittently, creating emotional highs and lows that neither fully controls. Aristotle admires her brilliance, yet he also senses the emotional toll that their connection takes on both of them. The relationship exists in a world shaped by admiration, pressure, and longing, forces that bind them together while also pulling them apart. Amid these dynamics, Aristotle begins noticing patterns he had not recognized before, subtle gaps between his personal desires and the realities of his life. Moments of hesitation that reveal deeper uncertainties, and questions about the future that neither he nor Maria can easily answer. Their bond, powerful and undeniable, is nonetheless surrounded by forces larger than emotion alone. He feels the need to regain a sense of stability, both for himself and for his children, whose lives are increasingly shaped by the turbulence surrounding him. As he reflects on these challenges, the hum of his fleet remains ever present. It follows him to ports and offices, to diplomatic gatherings and quiet evenings alone. It represents the foundation upon which he built his identity, yet it also underscores the distance between the certainty of his professional life and the uncertainty of his personal one. The hum, steady and unchanging, becomes a reminder of the choices he has made and the ones that await him. And it is that steady, reflective hum, holding within it both strength and unease, that carries this chapter to a quiet close. The steady, reflective hum that lingers in Aristotle Onassis's life continues to echo through the moments of contemplation that follow the turbulent years of personal entanglement and public attention. It is a sound that carries the weight of all he has built, yet it also holds the quieter truth that success does not guard against the uncertainties of the human heart. As he moves into the early 1960s, Aristotle finds himself standing at a crossroads shaped by shifting alliances, evolving ambitions, and the delicate threads that bind personal desire to public expectation. The world around him is changing quickly, and with each alteration in its rhythm, he senses that his own life is preparing for another decisive turn. His relationship with Maria Callas, though profound, now exists in a space marked by emotional strain and growing distance. They continue to care deeply for one another, but the paths they walk are shaped by forces neither can fully control. Maria's artistry demands constant travel and emotional immersion, moments of vulnerability and intensity that take a toll on her spirit. Aristotle, meanwhile, remains immersed in a business empire that grows more complex with each passing year. Tanker construction becomes larger in scale, negotiations become more intricate, and the global influence of oil magnifies the stakes of every decision he makes. The world that once offered clarity now feels layered with contradictions: love and ambition, loyalty and uncertainty, desire and hesitation. Into this shifting landscape comes a new and unexpected presence: Jacqueline Kennedy. The former First Lady, whose grace and poise captivated the world, carries with her a history marked by immense public admiration and devastating personal tragedy. Her life, already engraved into the collective consciousness through her husband's presidency, becomes defined by grief after the assassination of President John F. Kennedy in 1963. The loss creates a silence that few can understand, a quiet shadow that follows her through every public appearance. Aristotle, aware of her vulnerability and familiar with the price of living under constant scrutiny, approaches her with a careful, almost reverent sympathy. Their first meaningful interactions occur not through formal introductions, but through shared moments of solace. Aristotle, who has long sailed in circles that intersect with political and diplomatic worlds, offers Jacqueline a degree of privacy that is rare in her life. His yacht, a vessel built for long voyages and quiet retreats, becomes a place where she can momentarily escape the gaze of the world. Their early conversations are gentle, shaped by mutual understanding rather than intent. Aristotle speaks to her not as a magnet or a public figure, but as someone who knows the weight of loss, the fragility of identity, and the loneliness that often hides beneath fame. Over time, these encounters develop into a bond defined by simplicity and ease. They discuss history, literature, family, and the things that shape a life beyond power or expectation. Jacqueline, who has lived for years within a sphere of duty and symbolism, finds in Aristotle a presence unaffected by political obligation. Aristotle, in turn, discovers in her a quiet strength and contemplative depth that resonates with his own longing for stability. Their connection grows slowly, almost imperceptibly, until it becomes clear that a new chapter is forming. One that will complicate his relationship with Maria, shift his public identity, and ultimately reshape the course of his entire life. The growing closeness between Aristotle and Jacqueline does not go unnoticed. International newspapers, already accustomed to reporting on his personal affairs, begin to speculate about the nature of their relationship. The attention is persistent, often intrusive, and at times harsh. Maria Callas, who had shared years of intimacy and companionship with Aristotle, feels the impact deeply. For her, the emergence of Jacqueline Kennedy represents not just a personal heartbreak, but a shift in a world she believed to be secure. Maria's life, built on artistry and emotional expression, responds to the change with anguish that reverberates through her performances and her private moments. The bond that once brought comfort now becomes a source of profound sorrow. Aristotle, aware of the pain caused by this transition, attempts to navigate the situation with care. Yet the realities of human emotion defy even the most thoughtful intentions. He knows that his choices carry consequences, not only for himself, but for Maria, Jacqueline, and the families connected to them. The world may see only the surface shaped by headlines and photographs, but behind each article lies a complex tapestry of hope, regret, duty, and longing. Amid these personal developments, his business empire continues its rapid expansion. The rise of global oil consumption drives demand for larger tankers, and Aristotle responds by commissioning vessels that set records for size and capacity. Shipyards across the world recognize his name and anticipate his orders. He negotiates contracts with precision, securing long-term arrangements that position his fleet at the forefront of international trade. The world economy becomes increasingly interconnected, and Aristotle stands at the center of movements that shape the flow of energy across continents. Yet the pressures of this era mount. Economic unpredictability forces constant adjustment. Political tension reshapes shipping routes, and industrial competitors seek to challenge his dominance. He navigates these forces with the same resilience that once carried him through exile and hardship, but the weight of responsibility grows heavier. At the same time, the scrutiny surrounding his personal life intensifies. The intersections of business, love, and public attention begin to blur, creating a landscape where every decision, whether commercial or intimate, feels amplified. Through it all, Aristotle's connection with Jacqueline deepens. For her, he represents stability, protection, and a life beyond the shadows of political tragedy. For him, she offers renewal, dignity, and companionship that grows increasingly essential. Their relationship, eventually formalized through marriage in 1968, becomes one of the most discussed unions of the century. The ceremony, held on the island of Scorpios, draws worldwide attention, transforming a private moment into a global event. For Aristotle, the marriage symbolizes a long-awaited turning point, a search for permanence, for family unity, and for a sense of grounded purpose amid the turbulence of his expanding life. Yet even in the midst of celebration, the hum of his fleet remains present, steady and unchanging. It follows him across oceans, across continents, and through each transition of life. It is the sound of the world he built and the world he carries, the world that will continue moving even as new challenges and unexpected trials begin to form around him and his family. And it is that unwavering hum, steady beneath the emotional shifts and rising complexities, that brings this chapter to a solemn close. The unwavering hum that has carried Aristotle Onassis through decades of triumph and transformation continues beneath the surface of his life as he enters the late 1960s. It is a reassurance, familiar and steady, but it now resonates within a world that has grown far more complex than the one he once knew as a young man in Buenos Aires. The decisions he makes no longer affect only ships, markets, or investment strategies. They now shape the public narrative of one of the most watched families of the century. His marriage to Jacqueline Kennedy, celebrated and criticized in equal measure across the world, becomes a defining symbol of this new reality. The union, meant to provide stability for both, places them at the center of a global spotlight whose intensity neither could fully anticipate. For Jacqueline, life with Aristotle offers a degree of protection that had long eluded her. The years following President Kennedy's assassination had exposed her to relentless public intrusion. She lived under constant observation, surrounded by speculation about her grief, her choices, and her future. With Aristotle, she sought a refuge, a place where her children could be shielded from scrutiny and where she could regain control over the rhythm of her daily life. The island of Scorpios, quiet and secluded, became such a sanctuary. Here she walked along beaches untouched by cameras, spent evenings in tranquil reflection, and allowed herself moments of ordinary peace. Aristotle, aware of the fragility of her emotional world, took great effort to create spaces free from the pressures that shadowed her. Yet the pressures did not disappear entirely. Their marriage drew intense criticism from those who believed Jacqueline should remain tied to the legacy of her first husband. Others saw the union as a symbol of wealth overshadowing tradition. For Aristotle, accustomed to the fluctuations of public opinion, the controversy was neither surprising nor deeply wounding. But for Jacqueline, whose life had been shaped by both admiration and profound loss, the reactions added layers of emotional strain that followed her even into the most private moments. Aristotle tried to shield her, but the complexities of their world left cracks through which anxiety inevitably seeped. During these years, Aristotle faced challenges of his own within the structure of his expanding empire. His business, though powerful and wide-reaching, encountered increasing obstacles as global economic conditions shifted. Oil markets became volatile, political tensions reshaped trade routes, and industrial competition intensified. The shipping industry entered an era of unpredictable cycles, each requiring strategic adaptation. Aristotle remained vigilant, monitoring fluctuations in crude oil prices, staying attuned to diplomatic developments, and adjusting his fleet's operations to maintain viability. Yet even for someone as seasoned as he was, the pressures of managing a global enterprise during a turbulent economic period demanded constant focus and unrelenting effort. At the same time, Aristotle's personal concerns began to center increasingly on his children, particularly his son Alexander. Bright-spirited and deeply curious about the world, Alexander grew into adolescence and young adulthood with a set of interests shaped by modernity rather than maritime tradition. He became captivated by aviation, spending long hours studying aircraft, flight dynamics, and the engineering behind them. His fascination led him to pursue flying lessons, and he soon developed skill and confidence in the air. Aristotle, though initially cautious, supported his son's passion, recognizing in Alexander a drive that echoed his own youthful determination. Yet he also sensed the risks inherent in aviation, a field that demands precision and carries dangers that no amount of wealth or influence can eliminate. As Alexander's interest deepened, Aristotle grew increasingly protective. He ensured that his son had access to highly trained instructors, well-maintained aircraft, and every safety measure available. But Alexander, like many young men driven by passion and a desire to carve out their own identity, sought independence. He pushed against boundaries, eager to establish himself outside of his father's shadow. Their relationship, while loving, carried moments of tension, moments shaped by Aristotle's instinct to shield his son and Alexander's desire to define himself through actions that carried both risk and reward. Meanwhile, Aristotle's daughter, Christina, navigated the pressures of adolescence within the complex landscape of wealth, expectation, and public scrutiny. Sensitive and introspective, she often absorbed the emotional shifts around her with a depth that Aristotle recognized but struggled to address. The constant movement between continents, the presence of bodyguards, and the knowledge that the world watched her family created challenges that few young people could easily bear. Aristotle sought to provide stability, but the very structure of their lives, luxurious yet transient, made it difficult to create the steady ground she needed. Amid these personal concerns, Aristotle's relationship with Jacqueline evolved into a coexistence shaped by mutual care, but marked by increasingly separate spheres of life. Jacqueline, drawn to cultural and philanthropic interests, divided her time between her children, her commitments, and the quiet refuge Scorpios provided. Aristotle remained immersed in business, negotiations, and efforts to maintain control of his shipping empire during a period of rapid global change. Their lives, though joined by marriage, often moved in parallel lines rather than converging paths. The affection remained, but the daily rhythm of their world made closeness difficult to sustain. As the decade neared its end, the sense of looming change, once faint, began to grow more pronounced. Aristotle felt it in the shifting tone of global trade, in the unsettled nature of international politics, and in the fragile undercurrents within his own family. The hum of his fleet, once a reliable anchor, now carried a subtle strain, as though reflecting the tension that quietly gathered around him. Yet he pressed forward with determination, believing that through careful attention and decisive action, he could safeguard both his business and his family against the uncertainties that lay ahead. But change, once set in motion, cannot always be redirected. And in the opening months of a new decade, a sudden event, unforeseen and devastating, would strike at the core of his world, altering the course of his life and sending ripples through the family he cherished. For now, the hum continues, steady, familiar, yet shadowed by the sense that something irrevocable is approaching. And it is that shadowed hum, poised at the edge of heartbreak, that brings this chapter to a quiet, suspended close. The shadowed hum that lingered at the edge of Aristotle Onassis's world settles into a deeper, more foreboding rhythm as the new decade begins. It is the kind of sound one notices only when change is close, steady, familiar, yet carrying an undertone of tension that suggests something irreversible is drawing near. Aristotle feels it even before he understands it. The air around him seems heavier, as if preparing to hold the weight of an approaching grief. But nothing in his long, unpredictable life prepares him for the blow that will soon fall, nor for the sorrow that will echo through every corner of the Onassis family. On a quiet day in early 1973, the news arrives like a fracture. Alexander Onassis, Aristotle's beloved son, has been involved in an aviation accident. The aircraft he was flying, one he knew well, one he trusted, suffered a sudden mechanical failure shortly after takeoff. Witnesses report a sharp, unnatural tilt, a brief attempt at correction, and then a devastating impact. Emergency teams rush to the scene, their movements swift and disciplined, but the severity of the crash leaves little room for hope. Alexander survives the initial impact, but his injuries are grave. By the time Aristotle receives the message, his world has already begun to shift into a realm shaped by fear. He moves immediately, abandoning the calm facade that years of negotiation had trained into him. Every flight becomes a blur, every hallway a tunnel he hurries through, every command spoken with the urgency of a man fighting against time. Upon reaching the hospital, he sees his son, once vibrant, confident, and determined, lying still, surrounded by medical equipment, physicians, and the faint scent of antiseptic that always signals the fragility of hope. Alexander, barely past his 20s, now rests between life and death. For days, Aristotle remains at his son's side. He scarcely eats, barely sleeps, and speaks only in hushed tones when necessary. He studies every movement, every breath, every shift in the expressions of the medical staff. He searches for signs of improvement, for any indication that Alexander might survive. But as time passes, the quiet truth settles over the room like a dimming light. The injuries are too severe, the trauma too extensive. Alexander's chances fade with each passing hour. When the end comes, it arrives with a stillness that feels unreal. A faint change in the monitors, a final exhale, a quiet step forward from a physician. Aristotle hears the words, but the world around him seems to fall away. His son, the boy he had raised, the young man he had hoped would inherit not only his fortune, but his legacy, has died. In that moment, Aristotle Onassis, a man who survived the fall of Smyrna, exile, loss, and the relentless pressures of global competition, confronts a grief deeper than anything he has ever known. The death of a child leaves a mark that no amount of strength can shield against. For Aristotle, the loss becomes a wound that will never close. All the achievements, the ships, the contracts, the wealth, none of it holds meaning in the face of Alexander's absence. The world he built, once a place of ambition and triumph, now feels hollow. The hum of his fleet, once the sound of success, becomes an echo of everything he cannot change. In the months that follow, sorrow reshapes him. His movement slow, his posture shifts, and his once formidable presence softens into something more fragile. Those who see him notice the difference immediately. He begins speaking less, delegating more, withdrawing from conversations that once energized him. His eyes, once sharp with calculation and determination, now carry a distant, unfocused look. The man who commanded oceans now moves through quiet rooms, as though searching for something he cannot name. Jacqueline, watching him, senses the depth of his pain. Their marriage, already marked by distance, becomes a delicate structure held together by mutual compassion in the face of tragedy. She offers comfort where she can, provides quiet companionship, and ensures that Christina receives the support she needs as she grieves the loss of her brother. Christina, devastated and heartbroken, clings to memories of Alexander, struggling to understand how someone so full of life could be taken so suddenly. For her, the loss becomes a turning point, a moment that divides life into before and after. The investigation into the crash begins almost immediately. Engineers, aviation experts, and government officials examine every piece of wreckage, every maintenance record, every decision leading up to the flight. Rumors soon circulate, suggestions of mechanical negligence, whispers of sabotage, speculation about rivals in the competitive world of international transport. Aristotle, already overwhelmed by grief, becomes consumed by the need to understand what happened. He demands answers, hires specialists from multiple countries, and pursues every possible lead with the intensity of a man determined to uncover truth, no matter how painful. But answers remain elusive. Technical explanations emerge, but none offer the clarity he seeks. Each report ends with uncertainties. Each expert leaves room for doubt. The ambiguity becomes a torment. Aristotle, who once mastered markets, navigated political landscapes, and outmaneuvered competitors, now confronts a mystery that refuses resolution. The lack of closure deepens his sorrow, transforming grief into a constant ache that shadows his every step. During this period, his health begins to decline. Years of stress, long hours, and emotional strain take their toll. He experiences fatigue, difficulty concentrating, and a heaviness in his breathing that doctors attribute to exhaustion compounded by heartbreak. Medical examinations confirm what those around him have already sensed. He is deteriorating. The man who once commanded the world from boardrooms and decks of ships now struggles simply to rise from bed on difficult days. His business empire, though still vast, begins to shift under the weight of his absence. Trusted associates take on greater responsibility, but without Aristotle's leadership, the cohesion that once defined the organization weakens. Competitors advance, markets fluctuate, and long-term contracts waver. The world of shipping, indifferent to personal tragedy, continues moving forward with unrelenting momentum. Yet through all of this, Aristotle remains anchored to one truth. Nothing he lost in business compares to the loss of his son. Alexander's death becomes the defining moment of his final years, a sorrow that reshapes his world and alters the trajectory of his remaining days. Friends, colleagues, and even rivals understand that the man they once knew has been changed in a way that cannot be undone. And so, the shadowed hum that once signaled the approach of heartbreak now becomes the sound that fills the quiet spaces of Aristotle's grief. It follows him through corridors, across oceans, and into long nights spent awake, searching for meaning in a world that no longer feels familiar. And it is that hollow, echoing hum, carrying within it the weight of irreversible loss, that brings this chapter to a mournful close. The hollow, echoing hum that settled over Aristotle Onassis' life after the death of his son does not fade with time. Instead, it deepens, spreading into the quiet corners of each day, shaping his thoughts, his movements, and the rhythm of his remaining years. It becomes a constant presence, soft, persistent, and inescapable. He hears it in the early mornings when he wakes from restless sleep, in the stillness of his office where documents lie untouched, and in the empty spaces where Alexander once stood. That hum, once the symbol of industry and triumph, now carries the weight of finality. In the months following the tragedy, Aristotle's world shifts in ways both subtle and profound. Each passing week reveals new layers of grief that he had not anticipated. He tries to return to work, attempts to resume negotiations, and occasionally boards one of his ships to feel the familiar rhythm of the sea. But nothing feels as it once did. The spaces that once energized him now feel hollow. The decisions that once demanded precision now feel disconnected from any meaningful purpose. The empire he built, the ships, the contracts, the triumphs, seems to belong to another lifetime. His physical health begins to mirror the decline of his spirit. Doctors observe a marked change in his condition. His once brisk steps slow, his shoulders curve slightly, and moments of fatigue overcome him unexpectedly. Tests confirm that he is suffering from myasthenia gravis, a neuromuscular disease that weakens the body over time. The diagnosis clarifies what those close to him had sensed. Aristotle is fighting not only grief, but a progressive illness that drains his strength. He consults specialists across Europe, yet each offers similar advice: rest, careful treatment, and acceptance of limitations he has never allowed himself to consider. Jacqueline, watching him fade under the weight of sorrow and illness, offers quiet support. Their marriage, shaped by complexity and distance, now becomes a landscape of shared concern rather than shared dreams. She remains by his side during medical visits, helps manage details of his care, and hopes that stability might bring him even the smallest measure of peace. Yet she also recognizes that the grief consuming him reaches into a part of the human heart that no comfort can fully reach. Her presence provides steadiness, but the core of Aristotle's sorrow remains untouched by anything external. Meanwhile, Christina, devastated by the loss of her brother, struggles to navigate a world reshaped by tragedy. Her grief manifests in ways that mirror Aristotle's inner turmoil. Sensitive and perceptive, she feels her father's pain as keenly as her own. She attempts to spend more time with him, hoping that proximity might ease the burden they both carry. But Aristotle, locked in a sorrow that drains both strength and spirit, finds it difficult to offer reassurance. Their conversations, once flowing and warm, now contain long pauses, quiet sighs, and moments where words simply cannot express the magnitude of their shared loss. As the Onassis family tries to regain its balance, the world outside moves forward with its own relentless pace. Shipping markets fluctuate, oil prices shift, and new challenges emerge that require decisive action. Associates step in to manage operations, seeking to maintain the stability of the empire Aristotle once oversaw personally. Yet without his direct involvement, the structure begins to loosen. Contracts become more difficult to secure, negotiations falter, and long-standing partnerships show signs of strain. The empire that had seemed invincible now reveals its vulnerability in his absence. Aristotle watches these developments with a detached gaze. He notes the challenges, understands the stakes, and recognizes the consequences. But the fire that once drove him has dimmed. His thoughts drift repeatedly to Alexander, to the future he imagined for his son, and to the bitter truth that he will never see it realized. The contrast between the life he built and the life he lost becomes a source of profound disorientation. He had always believed that perseverance could overcome any challenge, yet grief proves immune to logic, strategy, or willpower. During this time, Aristotle spends increasing periods on Scorpios. The island, once a retreat of joy and celebration, becomes a place of quiet reflection. The gentle movement of the sea, the rustling of olive trees, and the distant calls of birds provide a muted backdrop to his days. He walks slowly along pathways he once traversed with Alexander and Christina, pausing frequently as memories surface. Rooms once filled with laughter now hold silence. The isolation, though heavy, brings him a measure of clarity, an understanding that his life is entering its final chapter. His interactions with Jacqueline become increasingly subdued. She remains attentive and compassionate, but the distance between their inner worlds widens. She sees that Aristotle's heart remains anchored to his past, to the memories of Smyrna, to the long path through hardship, and most of all, to his son. Their marriage, affected by grief and shaped by circumstances neither could control, settles into a quiet coexistence. By the mid-1970s, they begin spending more time apart, each seeking emotional space in the midst of overwhelming sorrow. Despite his declining health, Aristotle still finds brief moments of lucidity and purpose. He speaks with Christina about her future, hoping she will find stability and meaning beyond the weight of their name. He reviews documents related to his businesses, offering guidance where he can. He reconnects with old friends and colleagues, sharing stories that remind him of earlier years. These moments, though fleeting, give him a sense of continuity, a reminder that his life contained not only loss, but also profound resilience. Yet his strength continues to fade. The illness advances, exacerbated by unrelenting grief. He experiences difficulty swallowing, weakness in his limbs, and long stretches of exhaustion. Physicians recommend hospital care, and he is eventually transferred to the American hospital in Paris. The move marks a decisive shift. He now requires constant medical supervision, and the independent, commanding figure he once was becomes a patient in a quiet room, surrounded by specialists and the soft sounds of medical equipment. In these final months, Aristotle reflects often on the arc of his life. He recalls the fall of Smyrna, the years of struggle in Buenos Aires, the rise of his shipping empire, and the complicated relationships that shaped his public and private worlds. But above all, he returns repeatedly to thoughts of his children, to the pride he felt watching Alexander grow into a capable young man, and to the sorrow that accompanied his loss. The memories bring both comfort and pain, forming a tapestry of moments that define his final reflections. As the boundary between clarity and fatigue blurs, the hum he once knew so well, the hum of engines, ambition, and purposeful movement, fades into a quieter, more distant sound. It becomes the faint vibration of a world moving on without him, the gentle echo of a life lived with extraordinary intensity. And it is that fading hum, soft, distant, and final, that brings this chapter to its quiet close. The fading hum that once filled Aristotle Onassis's world grows ever more distant, as though slipping slowly beyond the threshold of memory. It becomes less the sound of ships and industry, and more a soft vibration felt only in the quietest moments, a reminder of the vast life he lived and the unrelenting forces that shaped it. In his hospital room in Paris, surrounded by white walls and muted voices, Aristotle drifts between wakefulness and reflection. The man who once commanded oceans now lies anchored to a bed, his body weakened but his mind still returning, again and again, to the long journey that brought him here. His nurses move gently around him, adjusting medications, whispering updates, and maintaining an atmosphere of calm that reflects the solemn dignity of his final days. Despite the pain and fatigue that accompany his illness, Aristotle clings to moments of clarity. During these periods, he speaks softly with Christina, who remains near him as often as possible. She sits beside his bed, holding his hand, offering quiet reassurances that she hopes bring him comfort. Yet she, too, carries the weight of loss that has shadowed their family. The death of her brother continues to reverberate through her life, shaping her emotions, her decisions, and her understanding of what it means to move forward. Seeing her father in such a fragile state deepens that sorrow, creating a sense of profound uncertainty about the future. At times, Aristotle asks for silence, not out of withdrawal but from a desire to revisit his memories with unbroken focus. His thoughts drift back to Smyrna, to the city of his childhood where the scent of spices filled the air, and the harbor seemed to promise endless possibilities. He remembers the fire, the chaos, and the abrupt collapse of everything familiar. He sees once again the frantic escape across the Aegean, the fear etched into the faces of those who fled, with nothing but survival on their minds. These early memories, though painful, also hold the beginnings of the strength that carried him through the decades that followed. He recalls the long days in Buenos Aires when he worked tirelessly, learning the mechanisms of an unfamiliar world, saving every coin, and sharpening his understanding of markets. He remembers the early business ventures, the risks that shaped his career, and the determination that propelled him forward each time circumstances threatened to push him back. Those years feel distant now, but they remain essential pieces of his life's mosaic, reminders of the resilience that once defined him. His mind then wanders to the years of expansion, years when the world seemed to open before him, offering opportunities that matched his ambition. He sees again the shipyards where his vessels took shape, the long boardroom tables crowded with documents and contracts, and the faces of partners, adversaries, and officials whose decisions influenced the course of global trade. There were triumphs, challenges, and countless negotiations that shaped the world's reliance on maritime transport. In these memories, he finds a mixture of pride and humility. He knows that he shaped an era of globalization, yet he also recognizes how dependent success is on timing, circumstance, and the cooperation of others. But as Aristotle drifts deeper into reflection, it is not business triumphs that dominate his thoughts. It is the people who filled his life. He remembers Athena, the young woman who became his first wife, and the family they built together. The early years of marriage, the birth of Alexander and Christina, and the shared hopes that accompanied those moments glow softly in his memory. Though their lives later diverged, he retains a deep gratitude for the foundation they created during that period. His thoughts then turn to Maria Callas, whose presence introduced a different kind of intensity into his life. He recalls her voice, powerful, filled with emotion, and the quiet moments when her vulnerability revealed a gentler side that few audiences ever saw. Their relationship, marked by both passion and complexity, occupies a space in his memory defined not by scandal, but by sincerity. He remembers the times they shared aboard his yacht, the conversations that stretched long into the night, and the emotional depth that made their connection unforgettable. He also thinks of Jacqueline, whose grace and endurance in the face of public tragedy moved him deeply. He recalls the moments of quiet companionship they found together, the mutual understanding they shared, and the tenderness she offered during the most difficult periods of his life. Their marriage, though complicated, had brought a sense of companionship in his later years that he valued profoundly. Yet above all, Aristotle's heart returns to Alexander. Memories of his son, laughing, learning, exploring, and growing, fill his mind with a mixture of love and sorrow so profound that it seems to transcend the boundaries of time. He sees Alexander's determination as a child, his quick intelligence, his dreams of independence, and his growing passion for aviation. He recalls the summers spent on Scorpios, the conversations aboard ships, and the sense of pride that welled in him each time he saw Alexander take another step toward adulthood. And then he remembers the phone call, the hospital room, the stillness of the moment when hope slipped away. The pain remains sharp, even now, cutting through the haze of illness with a clarity nothing else can match. As Aristotle continues his reflection, the world outside his hospital room moves forward. News circulates about shifting economies, new political developments, and the future of the shipping industry he helped shape. Yet these events feel increasingly distant, as though they belong to a world he has already stepped beyond. His focus narrows to the essentials: family, memory, and the final acceptance of the life he lived. Visitors arrive intermittently, offering hushed words, but much of his time is spent in quiet contemplation, surrounded by the steady rhythm of medical machinery. His illness progresses, slowly draining the strength from his body. He sleeps more often, and when he wakes, the room feels dimmer, the air heavier. Christina remains close, her presence a source of comfort, even in silence. The staff, recognizing the significance of the moment, treat him with gentle reverence, aware that they are witnessing the final days of a man whose life story had become intertwined with much of the 20th century. In the final hours, the fading hum that once defined his world becomes almost imperceptible. It thins, softens, and drifts away like a ship disappearing beyond the horizon. Aristotle's breathing grows shallow, his pulse weakens, and the room falls into a stillness that feels both solemn and inevitable. He passes quietly, surrounded by the tenderness of those who remain, leaving behind a legacy shaped by perseverance, ambition, and the unyielding complexities of the human heart. And it is that final stillness, soft, inevitable, and profound, that brings this chapter to its reflective close. The final stillness that settles over Aristotle. Onassis's passing lingers like a low, lingering tide, filling the empty spaces left in the wake of his extraordinary life. It rests first in the quiet hospital room where he drew his last breath, then spreads outward across continents, carried by news reports, whispered condolences, and the solemn expressions of those who once worked beside him. For a moment, the world seems to hold its breath, acknowledging the departure of a man whose story had spanned war, exile, fortune, tragedy, and the shifting tides of an entire century. Yet even as the world reflects on his legacy, that stillness deepens most profoundly within the hearts of those closest to him, especially Christina. She feels it like a silent tremor, a collapse of something immense and irreplaceable. Standing near the doorway after his passing, she watches as the nurses draw the curtains and dim the lights. The room becomes a quiet space of reverence, but for Christina, it becomes something more, a vault of memories now sealed by loss. The grief she carries for her father merges with the unresolved sorrow for her brother, creating a weight that feels nearly impossible to bear. She had been her father's emotional companion during his final months, witnessing his decline with a tenderness shaped by affection and shared pain. Now, with both her father and Alexander gone, Christina faces a world suddenly stripped of the anchors that once gave her strength. As arrangements for Aristotle's funeral begin, messages pour in from world leaders, business figures, celebrities, and individuals whose lives he touched in countless ways. His death marks the end of a remarkable chapter in international commerce, but within the Onassis family, it marks something far deeper: the unraveling of the fragile structure that had held them together through decades of turbulence. Jacqueline, who had experienced loss so public and so devastating in her earlier life, approaches this new grief with a quiet composure, shaped by experience. Yet even she seems subdued, aware that her marriage to Aristotle had been intertwined with the final, most difficult chapter of his existence. She travels to Athens with solemn dignity, participating in the rituals that accompany the passing of a man who once stood at the center of global attention. The funeral on Scorpios brings together an unusual gathering of dignitaries, aristocrats, shipping magnates, and family friends. The island, serene and windswept, becomes a temporary sanctuary for mourning. As the casket is carried along the familiar pathways Aristotle once walked, the air seems to hold a faint echo of his presence. The sea he loved stretches beyond the horizon, calm and reflective, as though acknowledging the return of a man whose life had been shaped by its restless waves. Christina walks behind the casket, her gaze fixed on the ground, her steps heavy with the knowledge that she is now the sole heir to a legacy, both vast and burdened with sorrow. After the funeral, the world resumes its movement, as it always does after the passing of great figures. Markets shift, headlines fade, and new stories emerge to claim attention. But for Christina, the stillness remains. She returns to her homes in Europe, surrounded by reminders of her father's life, yet unable to find comfort in them. The wealth he left behind provides security, but it also brings complexity. Legal proceedings begin, disputes arise, and the administration of the Onassis estate becomes a labyrinth of responsibilities she feels ill-equipped to navigate. Advisors and lawyers assure her that they will handle the details, but the emotional weight of the inheritance is more difficult to escape. In the months that follow, Christina attempts to rebuild a sense of stability. She divides her time between New York, Geneva, and Paris, seeking environments that might bring calm. She explores philanthropic interests, supports charities, and continues some of her father's commitments. But beneath each activity lies an undercurrent of exhaustion and unresolved sadness. Her health fluctuates, her relationships strain under the pressure of her grief, and she begins to withdraw from social circles that once provided connection. Even the luxury that surrounds her, the yachts, the residences, the private jets, feels like an empty shell, echoing with memories she cannot escape. At times, she speaks of her father with a mixture of love and bewilderment. She remembers the strength he carried during her childhood, the determination in his voice when he spoke of business, and the vulnerability he revealed only in his final months. She recognizes that his life, though remarkable, had been shaped by relentless striving and deep, unresolved wounds. The tragedies he carried had shaped the tragedies she now bears, and yet despite the sorrow, she feels a connection to him that remains vibrant and enduring. She seeks him in memories, in the rhythm of the sea, and in the faint hum of engines that sometimes passes overhead, a sound that recalls the life he once commanded. Meanwhile, the Onassis Empire undergoes a period of adjustment. Without Aristotle's leadership, the structure shifts under new management. Some ventures continue, while others falter. Markets change, and the globalization of shipping accelerates, introducing new competitors and altering the landscape Aristotle had once dominated. His influence remains visible in the legacy of maritime engineering he helped pioneer, but the empire itself, once driven by his singular vision, begins to settle into a quieter, more fragmented existence. Throughout this period, Christina tries to find meaning beyond the wealth and expectations tied to her family name. She seeks companionship, engagement, and a sense of purpose. There are moments of promise, friendships that offer warmth, relationships that spark hope, and travels that create brief periods of escape, yet the shadows that follow her remain close. She often speaks of the sense that her life is suspended between the world she inherited and the world she longs to create for herself. Her vulnerability deepens as she navigates a maze of emotional, financial, and personal challenges. Still, she persists, quietly, gently, and with a determination that echoes something of her father's resilience. She seeks medical care when needed, embraces spiritual practices, and attempts to cultivate spaces of peace within her surroundings. But the sorrow rooted in the losses she endured continues to cast its long shadow, testing her strength in ways she rarely expresses aloud. And through all of this, the final stillness that once marked her father's passing remains with her, not as an end, but as a reminder of the fragile, intricate threads that connect their lives, their struggles, and the legacy they share. And it is that lingering stillness, soft, solemn, and ever-present, that carries this chapter into its quiet close. The lingering stillness that followed Christina Onassis through the months after her father's death becomes the quiet backdrop of her life, a kind of unspoken companion that settles gently into each passing day. It is not the stillness of peace, nor the calm that accompanies understanding. Rather, it is the stillness left behind when someone has endured more loss than the heart was meant to hold. Christina feels it in her mornings, when she wakes with a heaviness that does not lift, and in her nights when memories rise like tides she cannot control. It surrounds her as she moves between her homes, between countries, and between the different versions of herself that she has tried to become in order to endure the weight of expectation and sorrow. Despite the vast inheritance she receives after Aristotle's passing, Christina does not find comfort in the security wealth is supposed to bring. She has seen firsthand that wealth cannot stop illness, prevent accidents, or protect a family from tragedy. It cannot heal the emptiness left by the deaths of those she loved most. The newspapers speak of her as the richest woman in the world, yet the title feels hollow, almost mocking. She knows that money can purchase convenience, treatment, and privacy, but it cannot offer the one thing she desires more than anything else: a life unmarked by loss. In the years that follow, she attempts to shape a path forward. She travels widely, sometimes for business, sometimes for escape, and sometimes simply because movement feels easier than stillness. She spends periods in Paris, New York, Geneva, and London, surrounding herself with familiar comforts and trusted friends. Her circle includes individuals who understand her sensitivity, her vulnerability, and the immense pressure she carries. Yet even among friends, Christina often feels separate from the world around her, as though her life exists behind a thin but unbreakable barrier. Her relationships, too, are marked by complexity. Christina longs for companionship, for the stability of a family of her own, and for a sense of belonging not defined by her father's legacy. She marries several times, each union beginning with hope, but slowly unraveling under the weight of emotional challenges, public scrutiny, and the deep-rooted insecurities that grief had carved into her spirit. The endings are often painful, leaving her with renewed reminders of how fragile and unpredictable human connection can be. Still, she continues to search, not out of desperation, but out of a sincere desire to build something meaningful in a life overshadowed by sorrow. Throughout these years, Christina remains deeply attached to her daughter, Athena, born from her marriage to Thierry Roussel. The child becomes the center of her world, the one constant that gives her purpose in the midst of instability. Christina pours her affection into motherhood with a tenderness shaped by the losses of her past. She hopes to give Athena the childhood she herself was denied, a childhood free from tragedy, grounded in affection, and protected from the overwhelming pressures of wealth and notoriety. Yet Christina also fears the dangers that money and public attention can bring, especially to a child growing up under constant observation. She navigates these concerns with care, seeking trusted support and maintaining strict oversight of those who surround her daughter. Meanwhile, the Onassis estate undergoes a series of legal and financial shifts. Christina's inheritance, though immense, is subject to disputes, tax complications, and ongoing business decisions that require careful management. She participates in meetings, reviews documents, and attempts to maintain control despite the emotional strain these responsibilities impose. Advisors assist her, but the burdens of leadership often feel overwhelming. The world expects her to be strong, decisive, and capable, a worthy successor to her father. Yet Christina, still struggling with grief, often feels like a fragile figure standing beneath the weight of a giant name. Her health begins to fluctuate during this period. She experiences bouts of depression, anxiety, and physical exhaustion that at times require hospitalization. Doctors offer treatment, recommending rest, medication, and stability. Christina follows their guidance, but her emotional world remains unsettled. The tragedies she has endured, her brother's death, her father's decline, the pressures of immense wealth, continue to shape her mental landscape, creating challenges that no straightforward treatment can easily resolve. Despite her struggles, Christina remains determined to create a meaningful life. She invests in philanthropic causes, supporting hospitals, cultural organizations, and initiatives aimed at improving the well-being of children. These acts of generosity reflect both her gratitude for the care she once received and her desire to give others the kind of support she often sought for herself. She finds solace in moments when her resources bring comfort to those in need, recognizing that the legacy she carries can be used for good. Her daughter Athena becomes her primary motivation in the years that follow. Christina devotes much of her time to ensuring her child's happiness, education, and emotional security. She hopes that Athena will grow up strong, confident, and able to navigate the complications of the Onassis name with grace. Christina plans her future carefully, arranging guardianship structures and financial protections that will shield her daughter from the challenges she herself faced. But even as she builds this framework, she remains troubled by the knowledge that she cannot control every aspect of the future. By her mid-30s, Christina begins expressing a desire for renewal. She speaks of settling into a quieter life, of seeking lasting companionship, and of creating a stable home environment for Athena. She also expresses fatigue, a profound weariness shaped by years of emotional struggle, and the relentless attention that follows her everywhere. She travels to the United States for a period of rest, hoping that distance might provide the clarity and calm she has sought for so long. But the stillness that once followed her father's passing remains, growing heavier, its presence deepening as her health falters. Friends notice that she becomes quieter, more introspective, as though she is slowly retreating into herself. She continues to care for Athena with unwavering devotion, but her own strength seems to diminish with each passing month. Medical examinations reveal no single explanation, yet those closest to her understand that the combination of grief, exhaustion, and emotional strain has taken a profound toll. And then, on a quiet November morning in 1988, while staying in Buenos Aires, the city where her father once rebuilt his life from nothing, Christina Onassis passes away unexpectedly. She is only 37 years old. The news spreads quickly across the world, carrying with it a sense of shock and disbelief. Another life touched by wealth, brilliance, and tragedy has come to its abrupt end. For Athena, still a young child, the loss becomes a defining moment, the final rupture in a family history marked by sorrow. For the world, Christina's passing symbolizes the close of an era shaped by ambition, glamour, and profound human fragility. And it is that fragile, sorrowful stillness, the stillness that now settles over another generation, that brings this chapter to a quiet close. The fragile, sorrowful stillness that settles over the Onassis family after Christina's passing stretches across the final chapter of their story like a dimming horizon. It is a stillness made not of silence but of absence, an absence that deepens with each generation, as though the weight of their shared history has become too heavy for life to sustain. In the wake of Christina's death, the world reacts with a mixture of sympathy and bewilderment. Newspapers recount the tragedies that had shaped her life, while commentators reflect on the paradox that defined the Onassis legacy: immense wealth accompanied by profound and unrelenting loss. But behind the public reaction lies a quieter truth, felt most intensely by the one life still tied to the Onassis name, her young daughter, Athena. At just 3 years old, Athena becomes the final inheritor of the vast Onassis fortune. The responsibilities, expectations, and public curiosity that once surrounded her grandfather and mother now settle, almost incomprehensibly, on her small shoulders. Yet she is far too young to understand what has happened. She knows only that her mother, the anchor of her life, has disappeared into the same unreachable distance as her uncle and grandfather. The adults around her speak in hushed tones, shielding her from the intensity of the moment, but the absence itself becomes a silent teacher, one that will shape her understanding of family, legacy, and loss for years to come. Following Christina's death, custody arrangements shift quickly. According to the structure Christina had established, Athena's upbringing is divided between her biological father, Thierry Roussel, and a board of trustees representing the Onassis Foundation. This arrangement reflects Christina's attempt to protect her daughter from some of the pressures that had defined her own youth. Yet even with these safeguards, Athena's childhood becomes a complex balancing act. She grows up between two worlds, one grounded in her father's life in Switzerland, and the other set within the legacy of a family she barely remembers, but whose shadow stretches across her entire future. The Onassis Foundation, established by Aristotle after Alexander's death, now carries new significance. Its trustees, many of whom had known Aristotle personally, take seriously their role in preserving the family's philanthropic legacy while safeguarding Athena's financial future. They manage the estate, oversee investments, and ensure that Christina's vision for her daughter's protection remains intact. Yet the dynamic between the foundation and Athena's father becomes strained at times, as differing perspectives emerge on how best to raise and protect a child whose inheritance attracts global attention. Athena's early years unfold quietly, marked by strict privacy and careful oversight. She attends school in Switzerland, accompanied by security personnel who ensure her safety. She studies languages, academics, and sports, developing interests that offer glimpses of a future shaped more by her own choices than by the legacy she carries. Those who meet her describe her as thoughtful, reserved, and introspective, a young girl who seems to understand, even from a young age, that her life is different from those around her. But even as Athena grows, the shadow of her family's past remains close. Photographs of her mother appear in magazines from time to time, accompanied by stories of Christina's struggles and the tragedies of the Onassis line. Reporters speculate about Athena's future, often with tones of curiosity or fascination that overlook the emotional weight she bears. Her inheritance becomes a symbol of both privilege and vulnerability, attracting attention that she consistently seeks to avoid. As she enters adolescence, Athena begins to develop a clearer sense of her identity, one shaped by the contrast between the world she lives in and the history she has inherited. She becomes increasingly aware of the public narrative surrounding her family, the rise of Aristotle, the tragedies of Alexander and Christina, and the vast fortune that now rests in her name. Yet rather than embracing the glamour or public visibility often associated with wealth, Athena chooses a path marked by privacy and independence. She avoids interviews, declines public appearances, and focuses instead on building a life defined by stability and personal achievement. Her interest in equestrian sports becomes a significant focus. She trains rigorously, travels for competitions, and finds in the discipline of riding a sense of purpose and grounding. Horses offer her a rare form of companionship, one unburdened by expectations, history, or notoriety. In the arenas where she competes, she is not the heiress of a vast shipping empire, but an athlete striving to master her craft. This pursuit becomes one of the most enduring anchors in her life. As Athena reaches adulthood, her role as the final heir to the Onassis legacy becomes more formalized. She gains access to the financial structures that had been managed on her behalf for decades. She reviews documents, meets with advisors, and makes decisions about the continuation of the foundation that bears her family name. Yet even in these responsibilities, she maintains a careful distance from the public eye. She understands that the Onassis name carries history, expectation, and public fascination, but she chooses to shape her life around quieter goals: education, athletic pursuits, personal relationships, and the creation of a world defined by intention rather than inheritance. Over time, she becomes increasingly aware of the contradictions embedded within the family story she represents. Her grandfather's rise from refugee to global magnate, her mother's struggles with grief and public scrutiny, and the tragedies that marked each generation form a narrative that is both extraordinary and deeply human. In interviews she rarely gives, she speaks of her mother with affection and sorrow, acknowledging the immense pressures Christina endured. She carries these memories not as burdens, but as reminders of the complexity of the legacy she inherits. As the years pass, the Onassis name gradually recedes from headlines. Shipping empires shift, markets change, and new global industries emerge. The world moves forward, leaving behind the era in which Aristotle Onassis stood as a towering figure of ambition and achievement. Yet the legacy of the family endures, not only in the foundation that continues to support cultural, educational, and medical initiatives, but also in the quieter, more personal legacy embodied by Athena. On Scorpios, the island once filled with laughter, gatherings, and the footsteps of a family trying to find belonging, nature gradually reclaims the spaces where history unfolded. The shores remain serene, the olive trees continue to rustle in the breeze, and the sea still reflects the light in ways that once captivated Aristotle during moments of reflection. The island stands as a silent witness to the entire arc of the Onassis story, from ambition to love, from loss to quiet resilience. And so, as Athena continues her life away from the public gaze, the story of the Onassis family settles into a kind of final stillness, a stillness shaped not by tragedy alone, but by the enduring presence of memory, legacy, and the quiet strength needed to carry both forward. And it is that gentle, enduring stillness, soft as a fading tide, steady as the horizon, that brings this story to its final close.